We do that again with the speaker on. All right, April 18th, 2018, 10 a.m., 10:06. Delaware County Cannabis Working Group meeting. And so first on the agenda is something from Joel. I'll start with you.
So hopefully everybody got a copy of the ordinance. Has everybody had a chance to look at it? Kylie would have sent it with your agenda. Yeah, I guess so. You might make some extras in case the public, both of them.
Well, I thought it was good, Joel. It looks like a legal version of what we talked about.
There's some things I want to say, but I think I need to wait till Heidi gets here.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, we're pausing for a second for Heidi to come back. Here it is here on the computer. If you guys got it there. It's pretty short for a legal.
I don't know. I guess maybe one question without you don't need this to really look at, to have the question of and I had seen it in a few other, I think, municipalities, counties, whatever, about the potential of including or specifically wording in here to exclude manufacturing in your under personal cultivation ordinances. Like, for example, saying that, and I don't know if there's other regulations that the county has in place that would otherwise exclude manufacturing, you know, like, and there's many different things, I guess, that could be considered under manufacturing, but they include a lot of times using chemicals and whatnot to extract things from the plant. And so I don't know if it warrants putting in here that we exclude personal manufacturing of cannabis in your home, unpermitted.
So under state law, it's allowed for your own consumption, but you can't use volatile solvents. You know, yeah, we never really did talk about it, but unless you want to restrict that somehow or define the solvents or something, you know, it's state law is going to cover that basic thing.
The restriction of the use of obviously volatile chemicals in the use of manufacturing process, so that may or may not be warranted.
It has a definition of what volatile means. I think it's basically if it's flammable, something like that.
I'm sure there's all chemicals have different labels and warnings and different specifications, so I'm sure there's some specifics how that's covered.
Is there just some reference that we should put in the ordinance that states to accede to state law on
What's
manufacturing?
in there is, I'll point it out. All personal cultivation of cannabis authorized under health and safety code 11.362.1, and 2 and 3. Those all are the statutes that contain these things. So we've just made them enforceable by county ordinance. So everything in them is now basically a county ordinance. And we can, enforce them like a nuisance. So one thing I want to, I want this to be kind of a consensus of the group before it goes to planning commission. So if this doesn't look like what we talked about too, let's talk about that now. We did already send this to the environmental review committee because they needed it, and we want to get on this planning commission on the 2nd. They are recommending some things. They want some consideration of community health effects of cannabis use, doing everything possible to prevent access of cannabis by children, and including some form of required filtration for indoor cannabis cultivation, and consideration that cannabis gardens and greenhouses should not be placed over septic systems and reserve areas for septic systems. The group already kind of has considered a lot of these things, but, if you want to change the ordinance to do so now, we're not going to the planning commission this month. It would be at least a month delay. These things would be presented along with the ordinance to the planning commission. The planning commission would make a recommendation whether or not these should be included when it goes to the board. And if they do, then the board of supervisors is going to be looking at this ordinance with these recommendations, and then they're going to have to decide whether, to vote on them without or to kick it back. So that's kind of what the political process will look like with these. A lot, because it's going to go through the planning commission and then be noticed for a board of supervisors meeting. We're looking at late May, probably the 2nd meeting in May at the soonest. And then they kick it back. We're going back through that process: ERC, planning commission, board of supervisors. So, if this is something that there's a real concern, the board of supervisors are going to want these things in there, we should probably just make the changes now and not go through the process. On the other hand, we discussed the access by children and filtration. Community health effects is vague. I don't know what they mean, what they think the health effects are that need to be mitigated. We could slap in there, I could do it before it goes to the planning commission this meeting, a requirement that you don't put it over your septic or septic reserve. That wouldn't be difficult. But if we want to reimagine the ordinance to protect children or something in a way that it doesn't now, I think the working group would be wise to just start that process now instead of waiting to see what the board's going to do. If you feel confident that this does do that, that we kind of have controlled for negative effects, or that the filtration is really unnecessary, we can move forward with this ordinance. But there might be a situation where probably Jesse is in front of the board of supervisors arguing that that's, overly burdensome or irrelevant, or that the ordinance does account for those health effects or something like that.
When I see most people talk about this ordinance, I really get the feeling that most groups and people aren't understanding exactly what they're talking about. We're talking about something that's been completely legal without any regulation for the past, 16, 17 months in the state, in Del Norte County? 20 months?
20 years.
Yeah, but I mean, the actual Prop 64 ordinance.
The six plants.
Controls this 6 plants has been
been
completely
legal
legal for the past 20 months under this Prop 64 ordinance, with zero regulation by the Del Norte County at all. And it's a kind of a stupid comment, but what harm are these 6 plants going to do to your septic system? All these different things. I get it, all these comments we're saying when we're talking about some type of permitted commercial grow, let's say, but on top of your septic system on that particular one, I find that to be almost the most negligible issue at all, because there's no different than people putting a small garden of some tomatoes and some beans and some whatnot, and it's no different at all. It has no bearing on your septic system. the children thing, that's part of what we've talked about, you know, inside. It's all, there's locked facilities and whatnot, public. I get all those things that you just said. I get how those need to be very specifically looked at with commercial applications, but I don't see them to have much more bearing on what we're trying to impose here and delay another 6 months if somebody doesn't like the ordinance. All that's doing is continuing with the lack of control that the county has no control at the moment. So not adopting something, just even these simple things like this, is only bettering the situation than it is already. So I personally don't see a need to include many more objectives in this personal cultivation ordinance.
I agree.
for the 6
I
months.
think in the interest of time and getting some progress, that things like this could be amended later as we learn more about it. I think 3 out of 4 of these are probably valid in some way. The septic system exclusion, I think, is completely ridiculous, because any garden you have at home, you don't restrict that, and you want things growing around that area. You want lawn over your septic area. And then your reserve area isn't even active. That's an area where you may have to use in the event that you need to install a new septic system. So nothing even exists under the ground in your reserve area. So that sounds to me like just a means of further restricting where you can cultivate outside, and doesn't have anything to do with anything practical whatsoever. So I don't think that that's a valid way, other than just simply stating there's certain areas of your yard you can't use just arbitrarily. That would be the same thing, I think. Filters. Yeah, like we talked about before, I think it's difficult to try to enforce something like that, enforce equipment usage and proper kinds of equipment in a, you know, in a something that you're doing that doesn't require a license. So it'd be tough just logistically. And then children access, I think that's addressed pretty well by the state and by this ordinance, and further details can be added, I think, easily if there's something obvious comes up that we learn. And then community health effects, I think, is probably just beyond the scope of what we're trying to do here with this in particular. That's a bigger picture. The state's involved with that. That's just a much larger consideration, I think, and is probably beyond the scope of this project, personally.
And Chair Davis, may I make a comment? I'd just like to state that the comments regarding the septic, those were made by our environmental health specialist, who is responsible for permitting septic systems. So just so you know where that,
Yeah, I would love
request
to.
made.
I would love to.
I mean, I can, if there's any way to do just something even advisory in the existing text, nothing, you know, just be on notice that you may want to be aware of.
Yeah, I would be
Just throwing that
an
out there.
advocate then, if that's the case, if the county's environmental person is recommending that we go beyond this ordinance, and the county should make a specific ordinance regarding all gardens, that they shouldn't be placed on top of septic systems.
Correct.
I mean, that is basically what we're talking about. It's not the growth of the cannabis plant isn't going to adversely affect your septic system any differently than what people are currently growing in their gardens. And so
That was not what was before the ERC, though. They
That's
were
what I would like-
considering
I-
that
but
particular
That's what I'm
ordinance.
saying, but that would be my prerogative
Yeah.
of that particular, if someone was advocating that growing a cannabis plant on top of a septic system was a negative impact, then we should look at the different type of regulation.
It'd be helpful for
Yeah.
us to understand probably how the Environmental Review Committee came to that conclusion. What information were they using? And that's all the more reason why I've been advocating for having more of the people who are involved in the decision-making process here at these meetings. Members of the Planning Commission, members of the Environmental Review Committee. They all need to be here, because this is way too late, frankly, for these issues to be brought up. We should have been talking about this way back in January when we were doing this. And so, you know, why was that not brought up? Because they weren't present. They're not here to I mean, I don't know.
Actively participating in this space.
Yeah, I don't know.
I
mean,
think
but-
there's another angle that, I'm just assuming, right? I heard Kurt's point there, but it also might be that the sewage, the potential raw sewage would contaminate the plant going that direction. You know, there could be that concern, right?
Well, I would just like to throw out that, I mean, you know, we're requiring pots, and so the roots won't extend outside of the pots.
Well,
And so
only
they wouldn't be
tier one.
going too much into the
That's only in
groundwater.
tier 1, though.
That's only in tier 1, we're outlining
Yeah,
for, okay.
tier 2 and tier 3 don't have containers.
So,
But no, that's not.
the other
that's
thing
not
I
the
wanted-
thing at all. I mean, maybe it is. I'd like to hear from the Environmental
Yeah.
Review Committee what the idea behind that was.
Perfect,
because-
it's a perfect point, Blake, but that also advocates the point of we shouldn't be allowing any gardens on top of septic systems, right? Like,
I'm wondering though, because I've seen in some local jurisdictions in municipalities, they restrict the indoor waste usage from the plants to go into the septic system. I'm wondering if maybe that was something that he had talked about. I mean, it would be nice to get some clarification from them as to like what he meant by that. You know, because there could be, if you're using, you know, chemical fertilizers indoors to water your plants and then you just drain it right into your septic system, you know, that could have adverse effects on your septic and leaching capabilities. It's going to destroy the
I suppose if
microbial
you're
activity.
over irrigating over a drain field, you could impact its ability
Yeah.
to leach or drain. But that's, so it'd be great for us to understand where they're coming from.
I can
otherwise.
see if he's in his office.
Cool.
Well, Joel, isn't this just one other committee that's looking at this and going to give recommendations to the board? So then the board, so we're just one committee, they're one committee, they're going to get like 5 different committees that recommend things and then adopt from that. I mean, so this is not the one going into effect. And I think that is part of the political process that the Board of Supervisors have asked all of us to do, is to give them our clearest image of what we want. Then they're going to ask the Environmental Committee, they're going to ask Planning, they're going to ask everybody else to give their review, and then they'll make an ordinance to more, they're not going to just adopt this, are they?
Well, yeah, I'm hoping they are just going to adopt it. I think the point of the working group is for staff to weigh in here.
And work through it.
Yeah, and work through it
Final
here.
product's going to come from Joel.
I have
pretty
a
much.
question, well, the concern that's been brought up, does it, on this ordinance, does it apply to like one sentence here or something? As I read it, it doesn't. It's just, it's vague, and so it's an outside opinion that ultimately really doesn't have anything to do with what we're saying right here. If we were seriously concerned, we would work that in.
You're
All
on.
right. Morgan, Randy, we're wondering about the Environmental Review Committee's recommendation to have concerns about cannabis gardens in and around septic drain fields and/or reserve areas for drain fields.
I'm Randy Hooper. I'm the Assistant Director of the Community Development Department. I work with Heidi as well as the other divisions within CDD. So the ERC did meet and kind of just, review what's on the table. I think at face value, what's been proposed is relatively simple. But in terms of the process, I mean, this is an obligation of the County Environmental Review Committee, which is a committee established under county code. It's composed of various members, the Environmental Health Division, the Native American representative, the real estate member, the public member, the assessor. I mean, multiple people from various backgrounds and disciplines. And again, the purpose of the ERC process is to vet these types of issues for impacts to the community, not singling in any individual issues out, but looking at it, generally from the context of kind of that holistic perspective. The Environmental Health Division, obviously what they're concerned with is environmental health. Septic systems and misuses of septic systems, misapplications of various types of developments that could have an adverse effect on the community at large. And, I think to put it bluntly, there's probably a lot of analysis that could be put into this type of a proposal in terms of what impacts could arise on the, to the community. I think it's probably a gross misstatement to say that it wouldn't have an impact unilaterally. We know from experience that, even individual septic systems, if there's misapplication of regulations, can have significant impacts. Groundwater contamination, surface water contamination. And so again, these types of issues need to be looked at very carefully. Again, the way that ERC process is set up is to be as informative and advisory as possible to the decision makers, which is similar to the position that you folks are in with the working group. However, this is something that they do on a regular basis. These are highly qualified individuals. The Environmental Health Division staff all hold REHS licenses from the state of California. And so whenever they speak to these types of issues, they do it with a high degree of knowledge and professional experience. So I would take that with serious consideration. I think I missed, probably a lot of the conversation, but I did pick up on the issues that were identified specific to septic systems and that specific recommendation from the ERC. I think some of the other things, the impacts to community health, I think there could be some language that's included in the ordinance that, just kind of makes note of, this being a concern to the ERC. Some of the other issues, access, from children and minors, I think to a large degree, and this is something the ERC talked about, the ordinance addresses, which is having this, in a kind of a locked area. Were there other specific issues that were objectionable as recommended by the ERC that I could speak to?
I think that our biggest point here on our committee is why is it that they're specifically saying that the marijuana cannabis cannot be grown over a septic system where normal backyards of people in Del Norte County have gardens of some sort that are grown over a septic system, and we're trying to implement this to get to the supervisors and to get it done and through, and all of a sudden this was thrown in. And I grow tomatoes over my septic system at my house, and you don't say anything about that. He grows his garden over at his house. If it's a problem that you guys all think, as professionals, as we all think you are also, if it's a problem with cannabis, it's a problem in the county, because everybody's growing over their septic system. So we would think that you would want to change county ordinance, not cannabis ordinance.
Okay, yeah, a couple things there. Obviously the ordinance that the ERC was asked to look at has to do with the cultivation of cannabis by individuals. And so, the answer that was given was specific to that particular question. I think if you were to pose that question to our Environmental Health Division staff as to whether there needs to be perhaps more regulation specific to these types of issues generally throughout the county, I think they would like to have that control. I think they knew it's maybe unrealistic in a lot of ways because people are going to do what they're going to do. But again, the question that was put before our ERC as part of that process, this was the answer. Could there be provisions included in the ordinance that, might be refined to better address the specific concerns? Absolutely. Again, what the ERC has been asked to do is to provide comments on what was put before them. If you want to have recommendations from the ERC in terms of what degree of permitting controls we would like to see in place, that is going to take time, and I think maybe that's one of the issues that the working group has been kind of wrestling with, is the timeliness of all these questions. But again, the process, the ERC process, getting an ordinance before the Board of Supervisors, this is kind of that standard review process where it goes before the Environmental Review Committee, goes to the Planning Commission, ultimately goes to the Board of Supervisors. I suppose it's debatable as to whether or not you actually have to go through all those processes, but that's the process that's been established, and so this is, I guess, one of the fruits of that conversation that y'all need to wrestle with.
Sure, yeah, so I guess, go ahead, Eric.
Oh, basically, I just had a question about, does the environmental group have any specific recommendations that they would like to present that could help us kind of decide where their thinking is? Because just saying no placement on septic or leach field, to me personally seems fairly broad. Mm-hmm. Is there any specifics of it in regards to growing the garden over the septic system or an indoor garden discharging into a septic system? I think that could be quite helpful for us so that we're not dealing with just a broad-based term.
Right. Yeah, so, again, the recommendation, to be perfectly clear, from the registered environmental health specialist employed by the County of Del Norte as part of that ERC process, was that this shouldn't happen, this shouldn't take place. I think if you want to, take what you're suggesting and perhaps pose that question in a more specific fashion to environmental health about what recommendations they would want to make that, maybe don't go necessarily that far, but kind of, address the concerns with the preservation of environmental health, that's a conversation we could have. I think I heard Jared Davis say that he would like to see, more active participation from the different folks that are involved in this process with the working group. I think that's a good idea because unfortunately, these are the types of things that are going to happen whenever you ask the question, of staff and then the county, as part of that process, what the concerns are. You got your answer. You may not like it, but that's the answer. Are there things that we can do maybe to kind of get on the same page, move the conversation towards a middle ground? I think those opportunities exist, but it needs to be facilitated.
Yeah,
So just to get your answer right, their recommendation is broad-based, is no placement of cannabis plants in a septic or leach field. That would be their recommendation currently? As it was presented to them?
That's
and the
where it
question
was left
answered.
at the ERC, absolutely.
my question is I understand the process, but I don't understand why. Like, it's not that I don't like their answer, and that doesn't have anything to do with it, but for us to include that in the ordinance without us understanding the reason why, like, they could just be wrong.
Right.
It doesn't, like, they could be the most professional people in the world, but if they have no experience with cannabis, then they can't give input to that subject.
Right.
And so that's why we need to understand the reasons why specifically, so that we can add cannabis knowledge specifically, and then we can blend the two. But with this like remote recommendation that doesn't include any specifics about why, leaves us really in the dark. And so that's what we need.
Yeah, you guys are in a really difficult position on many counts. Obviously this is a complication that maybe you didn't want to necessarily have to take on. But again, this is one of the fruits of that process. You have to understand, neither Heidi or myself are environmental health specialists, but we do have a lot of experience in land use planning and development. And the common comment that we receive through that ERC process with respect to development over septic areas is that it's never a good idea. If they could prohibit or recommend that it not ever be allowed, I think unequivocally that would be their recommendation.
Okay, that makes it clear.
I get what he's saying, and what he's saying to me, the translation really sounds like we would love if there was a county ordinance that said you can't put a garden, you can't put any type of stuff on top of your septic system. And that's why my opinion would be to forget about including that in this ordinance, because I see no reason to impose that regulation specifically to one thing, when in reality, what the environmental review is telling us is we would love it if we had a regulation that said no to nobody. Yeah. And we're trying to earmark it to this one thing. I don't, so that's my 2 cents on what I understand happening right here.
And since I got up here and started yammering, we actually did, in attendance, get our environmental health specialist, Huamua. And so if there's specific technical questions about what types of impacts development over septic systems does or creates, he would be able to answer that a lot more eloquently and technically correct than I would be able to.
Yeah, let's do it.
I would love to hear the specifics as to what,
Yeah,
if there's any.
maybe I could start with the question. So just to bring you up to speed a little bit, we've talked about this in regards to a couple of different directions, and one of those that Randy didn't touch on is, so we understand the recommendation from your side saying, don't do it. We're asking the question why, and I think what Randy touched on was like environmental water quality, those type of issues. I'm wondering if there's also an issue that, say it was a garden or marijuana thing, and the fact that it's growing on raw sewage, is that a concern going the other direction? Or is it strictly kind of the environment as opposed to the product?
Well, from the Brownsville concern is that if my concern is that building some kind of structure, either for growing on top of the septic system, the leach field, the tank or the reserve field. My concern is that if the septic system fails or needs to be repaired, at that point there's a structure on top of it, then how would we repair it? Or if it's built on the reserve field, if the primary leach line fails and the reserve lines has a structure on it for either greenhouse on it, then at that point how the structure would have to be removed and the reserve field would have to be used at that point.
So you're more concerned of structures than you are actually a garden?
So that's totally different than what we've been talking
Yeah.
about. And so that all rolls back to the fact that you would need a building permit to build a structure
Not
on top.
necessarily, if it's 120 square feet. So as a,
Yeah.
as an alternative, could we work with Joel to put something simple in stating if you're planning on doing a detached accessory building, that it can't be over the septic area, and we can put together some nice language that's simple for that.
Isn't a detached, I thought we had discussed all that, a detached accessory building.
We're
Since
talking
it-
about
since-
permits.
Since it's qualified as a detached accessory building, it would still require a permit, would it not?
Not if it's under 120 square feet or smaller.
Sure.
And
Which
so-
most of these
There's all
really
kinds of
will.
things you could
And
build,
so
like trellis.
if I go
things
buy
and
for example, a small 10 by 10 greenhouse from Home Depot or wherever, Delcur or something like that, some local facility, that doesn't require the permit, and I drop it in my yard, and it happens to be over top of a septic system, that's a concern, and I get your concern 100%. However, that concern isn't specific to cannabis. That concern is specific to any greenhouse that you would
Absolutely,
purchase.
but we're talking
Yeah.
about cannabis
We're
today.
talking
We're
about
not looking at those
structures.
other
We're talking about
issues.
structures
Exactly,
with
and so my only
permits.
point is, I think that should be better
But
suited
if we
than
have the
normal.
opportunity to be able to provide output to the, or, information
Yeah.
to the public to prevent them from doing something that may
Yeah.
cause them some issue down the road,
Right.
why can't we just put it in
Yeah,
there?
that makes perfect sense. That's excellent clarification. The concern is more with structures rather than the plants themselves. And that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, I totally
And
agree
then,
that
but
you should
going
put it
further-
in here, but we
Sure.
should also add it to a different ordinance
Right.
within the county as well that is broader than just cannabis.
As far as
Sure.
the structures that are over 120 square feet, that would be addressed on each building permit that's issued.
Sure.
But as far as regulations for buildings under 120 square feet, we would need to come up with an ordinance for that, and, maybe
Alright,
we will
so-
down the road. Hopefully Joel's listening there, so he can start helping us with that.
What do you think about that, Joel? Placing language for structure over,
Unpermitted structures, like,
I guess I'm wondering, what's the defining characteristic of this accessory building?
but it can have an impact to a drain field or a septic tank or.
Yeah, but like, when is something, I guess, if you bought something at Home Depot and it doesn't have a foundation or anything, and you just move it,
Right.
what does the definition, how are we gonna define this thing?
Sure, so
Permanent
unpermitted
foundation?
things, they can make you move anyway. So if it came up, you had something unpermitted sitting in your reserve field, you had to use it, then I think you could be made obligated to move that thing that you didn't have a permit for so that you could then access your reserve field space, right?
I think, are you saying something that's on a permanent foundation versus something that's portable?
So something-
So if you're going to build a structure that's on a permanent foundation, be aware of this.
Right, right.
Know where your septic is, know where your reserve area is.
And if I could just jump in real quick,
Please.
leave you guys with a little bit of a parting message. Again, the ERC process, similar to the working group, is advisory. Ultimately, the decision makers are going to be the Board of Supervisors. We can reflect in the staff recommendation whatever the consensus and the sentiment of these various advisory bodies is, and that's a typical function of the ERC, is not necessarily to have everything written in stone when it gets to the Board of Supervisors, but to have those recommendations in place so that they have more food for thought.
Sure, but simple things like the misunderstanding, we're thinking the issue is about the plants and the issue is really about structures, and it was just a simple miscommunication, I
Right,
think, that
yep.
could have caused a big problem down the line, but we caught it
Absolutely.
here early. One thing I'm thinking that could be, I don't know how this is a legal issue, but let's say you had a really nice established garden in the ground over your drain field, the septic fails, and then now you have to go in and dig it up. I suppose you could be obligated to destroy the crop to access the drain field, right? And you wouldn't be able to make a claim saying that, you know what I mean? Because you'd be obligated to destroy, well, not really. If you're obligated to repair a septic problem, you don't have a choice in that.
who's obligated? It's your septic, your.
Well, no, if you're causing a public health problem, if you're spewing sewer all over the ground, you don't get to choose when you got to take care of it. You don't get to not fix it,
I know,
right?
but that's your obligation as a property owner, so.
Right, I'm just saying you could have a situation where you're obligated to fix something by law, and then it results in you having to destroy your crop. You don't want somebody saying, oh, I don't want to have to fix my septic because I got to wait till I finish and harvest my plants. That's all I'm saying, and that's not an issue, right, Joel?
No, I mean,
No.
you don't have a right to ignore code
Right.
enforcement or environmental health because you're waiting for your harvest. If you
Right.
plant it on your leach field or whatever,
Right.
That's what you
your
did.
problem.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, so that covers that then, and then just no structures in the drain field areas. That makes perfect sense. All right.
If there were a way to just simplify that and just place that in the ordinance, I don't think that's a
Yeah.
big deal for me.
I'm wondering, before Randy leaves, or you, that if there's a simple one sentence that you could help us craft to get in here, that would, we're willing to do it. I don't think Randy's listening right now. Randy, is there a simple kind of a one sentence that you could help, if it's somewhat small and vague and to the point without getting ultimately detailed, we can simply work it in.
Yeah. So Joel and I were just kind of kibitzing a little bit, I think, on how best to approach the recommendation. And again, the process is typically set up so that the staff prepares a report based on the advice given by the Environmental Review Committee and different stakeholders, in this case, the Cannabis Working Group. I think the concern that Joel expressed to me would be if this thing gets too far along with these recommendations still in place, it could put the decision makers in a difficult position ultimately. So it would be nice to have some resolution from the working group. I think the resolution from the ERC is established unless we go back to that process again and reformulate a position for the ERC. But I think the working group certainly has an opportunity to make a recommendation specific to these issues. We can work with County Council's office on coming up with some language that would be appropriate, succinct, that would address, I think, the concerns without necessarily causing an overhaul or a rewrite of what's already been done.
So
Right, exactly.
Your issue that you're gonna make is going to be over structures over septic.
Yeah, and
instead
I
of gardens over septic.
Yes, and I apologize for the confusion on that. The conversation at the ERC did look at, a handful of different considerations. I don't think it was clear through that discussion that it had to do specifically with the structures as opposed to the gardens, but we can draw that distinction in the staff recommendation, absolutely.
I'd also like to bring out, it was pointed out to me that the county code also already does contain some language in our on-site sewage disposal ordinance related to the use of replacement areas, saying that they shall not be used for the construction of buildings, parking, driveways, swimming pools, or other uses that may adversely affect the replacement area.
And if you have a problem with your septic tank and have to change your leach field or anything, you have to get a permit anyhow, don't you?
That's correct, yes.
So that language would be in there.
Yeah, and so in what you just read, there's nothing that states anything that identifies a garden. Okay.
And last, thank you, Randy. You're welcome. And
Yes,
just wanted
thank
you
you.
to know if you ever have a problem in the office that you're in, politics is your field.
Thanks, guys. Okay, and then the locked space, I didn't note if you went into more definition of what that meant specifically. We talked about it, and I didn't know if there was a need for that to be more defined given the recommendations of the ERC, or what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, when we talked about locked space, what I remember is leaving it just to that default state, locked space. Getting into how it's locked, where it's locked, from whom it's locked, I think that's needlessly complicated from what I think we talked about. I don't, the septic thing is, fairly straightforward. We can add something before it hits the planning commission to address that. The other things, if you want to start revising the code, I think that probably formal written recommendations from the ERC, because I don't know what the community health effects are. I'm not sure what the effects on children has to do with environmental review, things like that. Those would be things that I would say, if you guys want to address those, let's pause this and take a month or two to do it.
Well, I think that we all addressed it up here, that we were trying to make it as closely knowledgeable that we didn't want kids around it, and we had all those issues. They're just not in the writing part that you have put down. If we need to put one more line in here, like should not be around children, it's going to be so vague, how do you enforce or do anything with it?
That's why, I mean, really, your parents have requirements to keep their kids safe. I don't know why it needs to be in a cannabis ordinance. I don't know how we would word it, how we would enforce it, how we would define it. The world of child welfare is a morass that I get stuck in a lot, and I can tell you it's real vague. It's a lot of judgment calls, a lot of best interest standards, a lot of things that don't need to be in a cannabis ordinance.
So is there a possibility, I mean, from the diversionary standpoint, we've placed in here, plants must be kept in a locked space and not be visible by normal unaided vision from a public space. That only pertains, if I read it, it seems to me it only pertains to the plant. What about the finished material, the dried product, the thing that everybody's so concerned with, the flower product? Is there a possibility to add a simple sentence within that states, you know, plants and dried finished product? Yeah, plants and products kept in a locked space. Maybe that could be something that's, you know, a simplified version to help with that.
I'd have to double check, but I'm pretty sure that's already the state law. It's the plants. It could. It could.
I'm wondering if that would be outside the scope of personal cultivation ordinance, because you're talking about dried or usable product, which is the same thing that you could, in theory, go down to the retail store that we're trying to put in place and purchase. And so that would be more of, in my opinion, of just the possession point. And so maybe that applies in a different ordinance somewhere.
Joel?
Sorry. That would not be difficult to add real quick before it goes.
Well, I would think that what you have here looks pretty good to me, with maybe the exception of that one Eric's talking about. And maybe if you can talk to the review board about their specifics on putting a structure, the one sentence deal about structures, not going over septic tanks, which there already seems to be.
Yeah, Heidi, are we, what kind of structures are we talking about here? If you are trying to get a permit to build something, is the county code already requiring you not to put it on your septic? Is that what I'm hearing?
It's buried in an on-site sewage disposal ordinance, and it's certainly information that we would pass along to the public whenever they're filing their application and when reviewing their plot plans, et cetera. I don't know if that answers your question or not.
So the language that says the area used for cultivation must comply with the California building, plumbing, mechanical, electrical, fire codes adopted by the county, would that cover that?
It would, but it's vague. I mean, it's so inclusive of hundreds and thousands of different things you need to comply with. I mean, I think if you really want to make a point, I think it would be better just to put a little sentence in that says.
But so the county would approve a building permit if the building permit was asked, can I build this accessory structure on top of my septic tank? You would approve that?
No, we would not.
Okay, so we wouldn't approve it. That's already in the code then. Got it.
There isn't really any other structures.
Okay, I mean, I just thought for the public's interest, trying to protect them, but if the consensus among the group is to leave it out, then
Other kinds of
leave it out.
structures you could have, they wouldn't be defined as structures by the county, but you could have posts and trellises and things. But I think structures are like where you're supporting some type of roof, a membrane, that's what calls it, or fences that are over a certain height, or poles maybe that are over a certain, I don't know where poles fit into county code, but
What if we use
strings and poles is about it. You could drive a T-post into a drain field, I suppose, and damage it.
Yeah, but you can do that.
Yeah, I kind of, I'm trying to find a happy medium here, and I'm kind of honored with this environmental committee has asked us to address, and Heidi seems to be pushing for it, and I respect that. And so I'm just thinking we add a sentence that says, don't build on a septic system footprint, right? It's kind of like just this little blanket reminder, don't be stupid.
Right.
And there's no harm in putting that in.
Like
There-
redundant
there's-
county
No,
code.
there's
is
no
that a
harm in putting
problem?
that in, exactly, because we've found out that there's already existing code that
Yeah.
doesn't allow it anyway.
No, I said septic system footprint, which includes the leach field.
Right.
That's a little different, and it's just going to make people think. And so I think it accomplishes what the Environmental Review Committee was asking, and it gives somebody something, and it's going to make everybody think a little when they read this.
The Nobody's going to read
I don't
it,
know
so.
enough about, is the septic system footprint?
That includes,
Well, the
no,
septic
you
system, you would
said
actually.
septic tank specifically.
No, it's the drain
Yeah.
field. You
So
can't
You have
build.
the
you can't-
tank, you have your leach lines, and you have a reserve
yeah.
area.
It's the whole area. You can't get a permit to build already on the whole
And,
area.
and, I mean, we could potentially just refer also back that you should comply with section 1.1,
Yeah.
chapter whatever.
Maybe that's
And then,
simpler.
and then if I could just reread what that section says entirely, it says replacement area. The replacement area shall not be disturbed to the extent that it is no longer suitable for wastewater disposal. The replacement area shall not be used for the construction of buildings, parking, driveways, swimming pools, or any other use that may adversely affect the replacement area.
Yeah, so
So it's already there.
refer to so-and-so section.
Adding it in here isn't gonna hurt anything. It's just
Is there a problem with having redundant county ordinances that are in one place and then another? Does
No,
that matter?
no, we have lots
Okay.
of those.
Okay, great, perfect.
So Heidi, if in that section that refers to the plumbing, electrical codes, it just adds that section, do you think that gets us where we need to go?
I think so.
Okay.
When
We can make that change,
I'd just
so
like to
fast.
make a comment about the more broad recommendations, the community health effects, the access and stuff, and then the filters, that's a concern about odor. It's a specific recommendation, but I guess I would just say that the entire ordinance is aimed at achieving all of those goals in one way or another. It's far more restrictive than what we have now, which is almost no regulation or restriction specific for cannabis. And so I think the whole process that we went through that was the whole point of it, was to, mitigate community health effects in whatever ways we can think of. Access to children and odor was kind of like the bulk of the entire discussion. So,
I was asked about this at the last board meeting about filters and things. And I said that the working group has designed the setbacks and the size limits to prevent odors from harming neighbors. So that if you do have an odor problem, it's probably a sign that some other requirement is being violated. That's the way I think of this ordinance. I don't want to be in a nuisance hearing saying, well, it smells really bad. I want to have the complaint from the smell lead to an inspection that finds a non-compliance issue that's straightforward to enforce.
right.
I think that holds true for the filtration. If somebody's smelling your indoor cultivation to the extent it's bothering them, you probably have more than 100 square feet. Now, I'm hoping that's true, because I don't know how bad 100 square feet smells. But if that's the kind of problem we run into, we might be back here reducing that to 60 square feet or something like that.
Well, or prevent certain types of strains from being grown, because I will say there are certain strains that have a tremendously more pungent smell than others.
Yeah, perfect. This is a great learning point where we can come back and modify as we learn more about
I
this.
think Joel just made a really good point there, that somebody, whether it's us or supervisors, somebody else, will more than likely be back at some point modifying these. And so, talking about someone's going to reject this because it doesn't have that and the other, all that's doing is causing it to be less restrictive in the short term at least. I mean, this is doing nothing other than helping the situation right now. This is doing nothing than putting things in a smaller controlled situation. So there would be no reason, in my view, not to adopt this with the obvious prerogative that it's clearly easy to come back and continue to amend it down the line. So
We have to publish a notice of hearing in the paper, and Lindsay's waiting for the green light to publish. So, if this group is on board with this ordinance with the two changes, and cannabis produced is locked, and we refer back to the language about the reserve areas and the septic areas, if the group's on board with that, I'd like to tell Lindsay to go ahead and publish.
I would
Yes,
like to
I
see
agree.
the language be that
Randy did suggest language to address the septic issue, if you're interested in hearing it.
absolutely.
It is the area utilized for on-site sewage disposal purposes, and then in parentheses, including septic tank and/or leach fields, as well as an area designated as a reserve area for the sewage disposal, shall not be developed with any structures associated with cultivation.
How is structure defined?
We just went over that. I think it's
We left that up to the attorney.
Well, Heidi, couldn't you just say less than 10 by 12 or 120 square foot? Because everything over that needs to be
Right.
permitted.
What's the difference between a structure and a structure associated with
Well, let me check. I'll
cultivation?
look in the definitions to see if we have a definition. I think we have one for building.
So I like the language that you read earlier better because it's a little more discretionary. Is it interfering or making it unsuitable for whatever?
Okay.
I like that language. When it gets to structure, I mean, is it a raised bed? Is it a trellis? Like, where is a structure, you know? Yeah.
Right, that seems a
Well,
little vague.
Joel, I think that we have a consensus that we all approve this with those changes, so that if somebody doesn't, they should speak now, so that we can further on go down to our map.
Yeah, we're getting married, let's move
Yeah.
on.
I just want to see that, the cannabis products have to be stored so that, we're not going to say it's a nuisance when someone's using it because it's not locked, so we just, maybe just stored, I guess, would probably solve that.
I think a hearing officer would find us ridiculous if you were using it outside of a locked space and we tried to, you're allowed to use cannabis, right?
Got to trust the justice system there, I guess.
But we can definitely say stored or kept. Yeah.
Okay,
I had two questions about some of the word or the definition that would be behind the word in this ordinance. And not that it would change number 6 on the back page. It says cultivation shall not be allowed within 25 feet of the front property line. And I was wondering how the front property line is defined on a piece of property.
Okay. It would be from the property line.
Okay, so it specifically says front property line, and so I can't.
Yes, the narrowest lot frontage.
right.
What is
For
it?
example, on an interior lot, there's only one front. On a corner lot, it would be the narrowest lot frontage, would be considered the front.
Okay,
for
so there
measurement
is, I just was
purposes.
unsure. There is a definition
Yes,
then
yes,
of what a
we
front
have-
property line is.
That is correct.
And
We
And
have
then
all of that in our
the
zoning.
other thing I was wondering was, and what place, how do you determine what a person's primary residence is? Is it a voter's registration record, or how do you determine what a person's primary residence is? Because obviously people could have multiple houses in the county, for example,
I'm
but
sorry,
we're,
where was that?
And that's in there. It's in there a couple places. That would be something that would be probably irrelevant. Like, we wouldn't have to prove your primary, if you have a bunch of vacation rentals and you've got a garden in each one, like, you're clearly violating that because they can't all be your primary residence. But largely, that's going to just kind of put people on notice that you're supposed to live there.
okay,
Supposed
yeah,
to live.
I was just wondering because I could think of, if you had, let's say, 3 houses in Delaware County and you shared time between all of them and you chose one, and you chose one that you wanted to have your 6 plants at,
That's your primary residence.
but what if it really?
Yeah, your primary residence is where you're growing pot, I guess. And
Yeah, okay, I just was wondering how we define that.
It depends, I mean, right, everyone's got a different, IRS has one definition,
Yeah.
voting's another. so-
That's to emphasize that it's not supposed to be a vacant absentee situation. If we had to get into the facts of whether it's somebody's primary, residence,
Right.
it would be, we would look at things like, where do you spend your time? Where is your mail going? Where are you, we could get, there's a lot of different definitions.
There's a
of-
few ambiguous, whatever you want to call it, I can't say the word right, ambiguous points that could help define that if it got into a question. But there's no real straight up black and white.
No, there's not a definition of primary residence.
Got it. I just was wondering, those are the two.
I would say, though, register to vote in the county would be the first thing we would take to the hearing officer. If we had, it's complaint driven, right? If somebody's complaining, there's probably something else going on too. So it's one of those things. It's a little more ammunition, advisory, a lot of ways. Grow where you're living situation.
All right, good, sounds good.
Other than that, it sounds great.
So it looks like we've got a consensus then on this. We're good. With those few changes.
All right, item 2 on the agenda. Finish up talking about a retail ordinance. Look at these maps. All right, I got the maps here on my computer. And one thing that I think one number that we didn't talk a lot about is the density, the space between the stores. We talked briefly about it, but we didn't talk much about what is a reasonable number, what's too much, what's too little, do we need one, these kinds of things. So I remember 1,000 feet, 2,000 feet, those were some numbers that got thrown out. Yeah. Is it important functionally to have a distance between them? And then if so, why? And that might help us to determine what the right number is, if we understand why we're doing it.
You know, I would have a conflict of interest, but, you know, I think what you hear Brookings a lot, you know, what Brookings looks like, they've got off-site signage and things like that. So I don't know, you know, and of course that's, you know, a person that doesn't like cannabis and they're being forced to realize that's a cannabis store. So, you know, I mean, that's who we'd be suiting there by putting a distance and trying not to make, you know, and maybe that person would like to see them all clustered together. I'm really not sure, you know.
Sure, yeah, who knows? Some people want them to be all in one place so they can avoid that spot if they don't want to look at them, I guess, I don't know.
Well, I think that just by our definition and by these maps that we have defined it down enough that if you add another 1,000 restriction on there, you're going to get where there's not going to be any stores.
You get one store in a region,
Right.
and so
You
they can
know,
monopolize the region. Is that right, to be able to have a store monopolize the
No,
region?
I think that, you know, the cannabis stores will take care of themselves. Whoever's running them, there's going to be something that people like about each individual. And to restrict it further, I mean, I think we restricted it for schools and for some of the churches. It looks like some of the churches are missed, but I guess it's churches with playgrounds or whatever, how we defined it.
Right.
But I think that we're getting too narrowed vision so that there's not going to be anywhere to have a shop.
Yeah,
Or like you say, it'll be some monopoly.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I don't know if putting a distance limit is maybe the right way to go. I mean, I could maybe see us putting a cap on the county. You know, I don't know how much or what yet, but the distance thing, I think, you know, we're really dealing with that with our zoning maps and our setbacks from the schools. I think as we go through these maps more, and the more I look at them, the more I see that, I mean, truly it would be a market structure thing. It would be, you know, if one person opened up a store here and another person decided to open up really close to him, well, I mean, that's kind of a business choice, and would that be the smartest thing for that person to do? Well, I mean, that's where, you know, your business is going to determine if you're successful or not. And I don't know if we should put, you know, 1,000 foot from every store. Just doesn't seem doable.
The reasonings, I guess, the only reasonings would be, I suppose, if for some reason you didn't want them all to be in one area. I'm not really sure why that's, I mean, maybe if they're all in one area, it changes the nature of that area significantly, possibly. Or from, like you said, from a business standpoint, to protect one business from another, which doesn't seem like the role of the county.
No, and it seems like, I mean, you know, with our county in particular being so spread out, you know, I don't see density being an issue here. You know, it's not like Alameda County where, you know, you've got most of your region is within a condensed area. And so you could have issues where shop after shop after shop. We don't have the opportunity, I think, here in this county to actually have a specified cannabis zone. You know, an industrial area where all cannabis activities for the county take place. We don't really have that here. You know, I think what we have is a spread out commercial area, you know, where we've got multiple places that don't necessarily, you know, like with this map that's in front of us now, the state line area. I mean, there's a handful of commercial zones here, but, you know, not all of them are available. There's not even necessarily structures on each one of those. And so it almost limits itself right there.
That makes sense, especially if we're going to have a number cap, then it probably makes it too difficult to have a distance between them also. Okay, so that sounds good. I like the idea of shelving the distance between them. And then the cap, some members of the board would be more comfortable if there was a number picked, 3 or 4 or 5, it kind of sounded like. What do you guys think? Does that seem like?
I mean, do we just go up to a number, say, I mean, do we just say, like in
It's
our
up to-
recommendations, would it be prudent for us to just go, okay, up to 5? Or, up to whatever we would assume would be a decent, ceiling for that, versus saying, okay, only, we specify the specific numbers, kind of getting back to what Blake has been, kind of clamoring for this whole time, is giving just generalized recommendations, allowing the supervisors to make the choice. So like up to 5 or up to 6 or whatever.
Yeah, we don't
Okay, so.
want to burden them with the
So
responsibility of making so many
the
decisions.
number thing, it adds a whole different layer to what we're doing here. And so I would be an advocate for, let's get a retail ordinance in place and forget about the number thing for a minute. And the question would have to be posed to the Board of Supervisors. If you want a number, then there's a whole nother road we have to go down, which could take a long time. That's figuring out what the, like, let's say RFP process or some type of process that we would have to determine how to select those, their
It
number.
could just be a first come, first serve.
Or
doesn't have
it
to
would be
a
first come, first
process.
served, but there's a, like, so that's gonna be a multi-week discussion if we say, here's a fixed number, and then how are we gonna determine that number? And so, I think we get a retail ordinance in place and go from there.
That's why I never liked a number.
Yeah, I agree. I think we need to get the retail ordinance, we need to give them the maps that we think, and the caps not really gonna matter, because like Joel said on the other ordinance, on your grow ordinance, things are gonna change if people want it to change. They're gonna bring the change to you, and we're gonna have to learn that we are not always right, and we may have to change something, and the county may have to change that ordinance. I don't know how deep that gets.
So I've been pretty consistently against the RFP because I don't want county staff choosing the winners here. I don't like the first in time thing either, because then the market isn't choosing the 5 best, it's the 5 first. And then we're in a situation where we might have 5 bad operations. And how does that serve the county? But I don't necessarily think it's the retail and then we can decide the other RFP situation later. If we're just going to do a retail ordinance where the distance between and the areas that allow are going to be the natural limits, then that's the natural limits. That's instead of an RFP program. So I think that's the direction we were going. I know I missed the last conversation about this, but.
That's the way I think the board would like to go, and I think that the group would like to go. The Board of Supervisors, not being part of this conversation, wants to start with a cap. And I think that's it's an instinct as an easy way to limit things.
I think one or two of the board of supervisors members have mentioned that, but they
Sure.
haven't.
So, again, I hear what you guys are saying, and I'm probably willing to go along with where you're coming from. I just want to remind you that, kind of back to the original handful of meetings when we first started and where I was coming from, I think it is in everyone's best interest, you as potential growers, business guys that are involved in this world, and us as a community. It's in our best interest to limit it. It really is. I'm reminding you of that point.
How should we limit
And
it?
this is the simplest, easiest opportunity to limit it.
Right, but how does it limit it? That's what we need to find out. Like Joel brought up, we can limit the number, but
Yeah.
we may end up with 5 completely dysfunctional stores all run by one person
Yeah,
who disrespects the community and causes all kinds of problems, and then nobody else can get in there because they hold the 5 permits that are available, and they're meeting all the minimum legal requirements to keep on holding those permits, even though they're doing the community a complete disservice. So that's a real threat, I think. And so, Aaron.
Just because this is my educational background, economic theory shows that limiting market caps, the only person that benefits are the people that own the permits. The people that are disadvantaged from it is the consumer. Classic example is New York City taxis. They have to have medallions to be operating a taxi, so they can charge a premium for it. Of course, we are in a border town where Oregon, people would just go to Oregon and purchase their products there if the people that have the caps charge too much. So just throwing that out there too.
Yeah, and I appreciate that point, and I think I understand that point, and that concept doesn't make what I said invalid, right? It's still true if that's the direction y'all want to go.
Let's find a way to, what I'm trying to say is let's find a way to limit it, like that achieves what you're talking about, the things that you reiterated in the beginning and at each meeting that I think are important to limit it. But I think we should do that in a functional way that achieves what we're saying we're trying to achieve. So it may sound good to the community to say we're limiting it to 4, but if it's not achieving the goals that we're trying to achieve, then it's counterproductive. So I think we can find we're working on ways to definitely limit it with these setbacks, so.
Yeah, I think that our limit, our way and our thing that we have chosen to limit is by going to these maps and
Keeping
having
the setbacks
available
larger,
areas.
leaning toward larger setbacks instead of smaller ones.
Yeah,
like-
and, things come and go, like I was pointing out to Blake in Fort Dick, there isn't any except for where the old Melody Market was across the bridge. And that's a private residence right now, but it was a market at one time, and that's why it's specifically probably commercial. And so that could be born again, that market or that store or that kind of a thing. And that is the way we are limiting. We're not, and putting a cap on it is like limiting it too much.
And just some economic news, I think Brookings has lost a few stores. One person owns a handful of them also, so what we're talking about is happening there. I heard some talk this morning about the person who owns several, has their eye on another one because it appears to look slow, and so he wants to own it also, which is sort of counterproductive to business, but it's what you do when you want to control the market. But they're losing stores, so I think the market is also going to limit this naturally, as we'll see. So I think the earlier fears of if you have one place and there's vast distances where you can't access retail, then you're going to get a whole bunch of stores. But because there's access all around, it's not going to make business sense to open. And it used to be cheap and easy to open up a retail outlet under the collective model. There was nothing to it. Now the costs of opening up a retail outlet are enormous. And so you don't just go doing it willy-nilly unless you really are sure that you're going to either lock up the market or it makes good normal business sense, I suppose. So, food for thought on the economy of cannabis.
I know some cities, again, I have a conflict of interest. Some cities, have gone with, I think, 1 per 15,000. For a while, there was some confusion whether it was a league of cities that was
Census
suggesting it,
tract
but it was
stuff,
really
right,
just
right.
a few cities that had brought their own input to that table.
So that was 50,000 of population people, or what?
1 per 15,000. But again, I do agree that would limit,
Have
competition and,
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't want to end up like New York, where basically each retail establishment has purview over 1.3 million people.
Sure. So yes, because the county's spread out, it could make economic sense to have them spread out in different regions for access. So Blake, getting back to your original thoughts at the early meetings that you reiterate at each meeting, what is your idea about having stores cover the map, basically, not in large quantity, but in serving all of the areas, or would you rather see areas that, just don't
So
have?
I guess I would pose the question like this, with the current maps that we have, could you fit 40 retailers in here?
No.
30, 20,
Right,
so
okay,
I'm
sure.
just trying to understand, because I really have not studied the maps, other than my local region. Because I don't know the other regions that well. And so that's how I would approach this, right? There is a number where we're all like, no, it's too many, it's too many. But if we're not careful, we could allow for that because it's all right here in front of us. And so again, today's the time to get it right. Or at least put the parameters around it.
I'd also like to point out that when you're talking about a permit and kind of a land use, it's easier to expand, to be more lenient and allow more retail than to restrict existing uses. If we find we have too many, you have to wait till the permit runs out,
Yeah.
you know, and then even then, entitlement's always a weird battle. So, you know, a more restrictive or a too restrictive ordinance to start would definitely be the direction I would advise the board
So
to go.
starting slower is, that's where I'm coming from.
So, you know, if it starts out at, you know, 2,000 feet from a church and that ends up restricting everybody, maybe 1,500 later or 1,000.
So
If
how
we start
hard,
at 500 and then we think, no, that's not enough, that's harder process to go at.
sure. So given that everyone expects details need to be changed, ordinarily, we don't want to adjust ordinances in order to fix things, but it's not the end of the world. It's sort of a expected process, and you guys are prepared to be able to make changes like that to adjust to the market.
Yeah, the thing though that should be considered, when we're talking about land use permits, you start to get vested rights in a way that you wouldn't with the personal cultivation, where we can go change it if it's not working. So we don't want to allow vested rights that are problematic, you know, so starting restrictive and then.
But going the other way, it's not,
Yeah.
you guys are prepared to make changes in terms of
Yeah,
less
I mean,
restriction if it needed to
so
be.
these will be zoning ordinances, so every amendment, every adjustment is going to do the planning commission circuit. It's
Sure.
not easy, but I think everybody knows this is going to be an ongoing process.
Right.
So I guess, Mike, I guess I have a little thought too. I mean, and I guess this would be a question to be posed to the board. Does the board have any intentions to continue with this advisory committee in some way, shape, or form to help, with the process as it moves forward? Because it seems like from what you just said, if we draft this ordinance and we have changes, how is that gonna happen?
When I first brought this up to the Board of Supervisors, I said that. I mean, this is going to be an ongoing fine-tuning process, and, maybe it becomes a meeting once every 3 months to check in, and code enforcement can say what the complaints have been, and staff can say what the problem, maybe it's like that. Something like that makes sense to me if everybody is on board to keep doing the work.
I'm kind of back staring at the map on Fort Dick, and the church that I go to is no longer on there because all churches are now off. That's a no?
There's a whole bunch of churches on these maps, and maybe, I don't know which church you're
Yeah,
specifically
okay.
referring to, but I'm assuming maybe possibly the one across from Fort Dick Market, which seems to be omitted still on this map.
Yeah, it's not there.
But that church would fall under the guise of other things that we're circling.
Well, I was just going to point out, my kids also went to grade school there, and it's no longer a school, but it was just a couple years ago, and it may be again because it's got a facility. It's definitely a youth center.
It definitely qualifies under the definition of the state of a youth center.
Yeah.
And it should be dotted as such on this map.
Yeah, and then so, again, we kind of been through this, and it was on here once, and now it isn't, and so I'd like to see it
Which
done.
map are we looking at right now?
Fort Dick. But just to be clear, like if we miss any spots, it
Heidi
won't,
just sent it to me this morning.
if we miss locations, it won't be like that they're
Yeah.
free game or something.
Good point, yeah,
So
I got it.
Yeah, this is kind of
It's to help us determine what are the right numbers, if-
Yeah.
Because additionally, the circle is not a legal thing either. It's a
It'll be a
Yeah, the
polygon.
polygon thing that it
But
goes from
this is,
all
we
property
can't, we
lines.
can't get every single spot, and we can't get it all perfect, just to pick a number, and, if we're gonna shoot wide and be more restrictive and be able to adjust it later, that sounds reasonable, so
So
it's,
it's the Fort Dick Bible Academy?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah, that's the one.
And that would meet the definitions of legal things under the already existing Prop 64.
Yeah, that
Definitions,
should definitely be
yeah.
on there.
so if we
and
get
then-
into the more dense areas where there's lots of circles, I think is what we need to be thinking about in terms of picking numbers, because, that's what we're trying to determine is what's too big, what wipes out all the available space, right? So that's,
Sure, again, I don't like picking the number, and then I don't know,
well, we have to.
No, we definitely don't have to. We've already been down that road, that we don't have to have a max number.
Pick a number.
I think we kind of do. We have to have an actual number, a setback. That's the point of
Oh,
this.
no, I thought you were talking about numbers of
No, no, no,
facilities.
setbacks. No, I'm sorry. Yeah, setback, picking the right.
Oh, yeah,
number
no,
for
setbacks, that's what all these
so that-
circles are all about. I
Yeah,
thought you
so
were
in
talking about
order,
number of
in order for
facilities.
us to pick the right number so that we can move on, that's kind of the hangup here really, is the last thing is what
That,
are
that
the
and then the
numbers.
We had that
potential
church
for
back in
limiting
most
the
of this
max
area.
number.
So when I come down and I
will
look
then
at
go away.
Not most.
the Crescent City North
Yeah.
area where there's lots of circles.
Yeah.
The width of this here, so if you drop that.
I have a question.
Joel, which we kind of got, we were discussing last meeting, and you weren't here, I think, we had talked about the whole ability of the corridor access. How does that work? Is there some,
Right,
how would you
exceptions.
define?
Correct.
We would
corridor
have
access
to
exceptions?
figure out exactly how to define the area.
How do I get?
You know,
North
if
Market
you've got,
located out? Can we just make that circle like 300?
you know, if you're on North Crest or you're on 101,
I need that circle. to get
it's a little
300.
easier.
Just that one.
If you want to expand that corridor to something that's maybe a block off,
Would it be something like, if you were like picking, let's say 101 as a corridor, if you're on 101, the distances from all these places would then be this new number, like it's just shorter distance?
yeah, and it'd be like if you're on 101 between such and such street and such street, then your setbacks are as follows. That's how I'm thinking of it. I don't know, Heidi, you got any ideas on that?
No, I don't, but on a different topic, I'd just like to point out that Kate Fisher, who's here with the Yurok tribe, she just wanted to point out that the tribe has a zero tolerance policy on the reservation for cannabis, so that's something we're going to need to take into consideration when we are looking at the Klamath maps.
Yeah, I had asked Ellie Hoops to weigh in on that, like what sort of number they're thinking of as a setback from the actual reservation, and she acknowledged that that was something that they were working on an actual response to from their group, but not here today.
So these ordinances are exempt from CEQA specifically, basically by SB 94. But if they weren't, and we went through the CEQA process, we'd consult with the tribes, and we would try to mitigate the effects of this ordinance on any tribally important land. It wouldn't necessarily be the reservation boundary.
Great.
And it might be a good idea to just do that, even though we're exempt from CEQA.
Yeah, I think so.
And
too.
let the tribe come in and tell us where it would really bother them, and, you know,
Right.
respect that.
So they're like, they're on board, they're working on that.
So
they
that
can
then,
give us an answer.
2 cents there, that, if we want to do that, that should be the prerogative for the entire county, grasping all 3 tribes that have prerogative over this entire county for Aboriginal territories and possible tribally important sensitive zones.
Yeah.
Okay, so as far as the numbers on these, Blake, you see, notice we've got different numbers. There's different circles that represent different distances. So we have the 600-foot circle, and we got 2,000-foot circles. And then the other maps, they're like the duplication, but it shows it with a 1,000-foot circle for the youth centers and the parks. It doesn't seem to interfere a lot, having the, bumping it up from the state recommendation of 600 and going to 1,000. I think we decided, we just, in our last conversation, we were gonna shy away from that. But there was some, I know Robert and others, and unless we can fix it with corridors, the 2,000 foot for schools wipes out a lot of the ideal commercial space that everyone would agree are the right places. So if we can fix that with corridors on, like say 101 zone or
North Crest.
North Crest, where it's business and industrial minded.
I would also like to see us adopt a no boundary for a medical-only dispensary. You know, so it wouldn't be retail sales, it would just be, you know, and that's a special kind of store. It really ends up with somebody who's appealing to trying to serve people who are using it as a medicine, you know, so I mean, you end up with a different clientele and a different opportunity to provide a service to them. And of course, we have, you know, we have Redwood Coast Collective, so I'd like to see them, you know, as kind of our it's been our status quo for cannabis for about a decade, you know, to see that, you know, they're allowed to continue on.
Sure. I think
Yeah,
that
we did
existing
talk about that the
medical
last meeting, I
collective
think,
can-
with
As a
Patty.
non-conforming use, I
Yeah.
think so long as it isn't expanding or possibly changing in nature, which might include, if you were to include recreational, so
Yeah.
it could change in nature. So it could be covered under that as far as new operations that want to just do medical only. That's another layer in the ordinance, I suppose. You have a different set of rules. I'm not sure if that's something we're ready to get into yet. Yeah, let's do that.
Look, there's 1, 2, 3 locations that's eligible. Yeah, and just kind of get a count and idea.
Does someone have the?
I'm at the computer. Am I in charge of this thing? Do you want to? No. No, they're your, oh, if you can do it from there. I mean, I don't know my way around these maps. These aren't my maps.
Y'all were supposed to bring your own maps, people. The phone's not big enough. You can't see nothing. Put that thing away. I'm taking it away from you. Yeah, I can't.
Semi-handicap smart.
Yeah, no, it's not gonna help you. It's too little.
Well, if you look at the ones on here, they're 2 level 2, you can't define streets and other things.
Most of these maps have multiple, there's multiple maps.
Yeah,
I mean,
two sets of
I'll point
maps.
out roads if that's helpful.
Those first 2 squares there, it really doesn't matter.
Okay, let's all get on the same map and talk about one map. Which one are we all looking
Okay,
at?
this would be,
1 or 2?
Are you looking at the computer screen or are you looking at your phone?
Both, actually.
okay, the first one would be the White Rock Resort, and then across from it, there was a motel, and there's some type of a structure that has some type of,
There's apartments and a little motel. And
Yeah.
we had started to rebuild an old cafe.
okay.
So my question is that
So-
get 1 or 2 of these retail outlets?
You could probably fit 30 if you wanted to.
No, we have the ability, I thought we were gonna put some sort of
Yeah, but we're
minimum distance between 2.
No,
I don't-
we skipped that idea because it doesn't, it causes all kinds of other problems. So,
I'd also like to point out that the pink that's on the west side of the highway, where the White Rock is and where the Nautical Inn restaurant used to be, that's in the coastal zone. Well, actually, both of those polygons are in the coastal zone, but this one is actually within an appeals jurisdiction, which would mean any type of development activity would also have to go before our planning commission.
Isn't
In
almost,
addition to the use permit, I guess it would be anyway, but just another little added.
almost everything
layer.
in this coastal zone is, I mean,
That is
there's
correct.
probably only maybe a handful, if
Yeah,
not.
but this particular, when you're
Yeah.
west of the highway in a lot of these locations, depending, it's an added layer of review.
Likely development.
I think
I
even
mean,
it-
it would be scrutinized
Even in some of
heavier.
this zone, isn't it even east of the highway on some of these locations?
Can you repeat that?
Even, isn't east of the highway on some of these,
Oh,
this map
yes,
is even
yes,
coastal
but-
zone, right? It's not
but-
just
But they
west of the
wouldn't
highway.
necessarily
Yeah.
be projects that would have to go, well, if we're considering everything related to cannabis is going to go to the planning commission anyway as a use permit, then I guess it doesn't make a difference. However, if when you're looking at coastal resources and protection of coastal resources, there's a higher scrutiny if you're within what we would refer to be the appeals jurisdiction, and those particular projects are reviewed by coastal commission staff down in Arcata, and, you know,
Right. Most retail probably wouldn't have much problem with any of that anyway, just basic retail, unless you're constructing stuff. But if you're, you know, utilizing existing building. What? Well, it's not a
Oh,
use center.
Pelican Beach, it's a state park. Pelican, that's not shown.
Yeah, it's not a youth
Oh,
center,
it's not
so
a
it's
youth
not on there. Okay, so there's room for stores on this map, so we could go to the next one.
Well, if you're going down this map, the only next spot is where you have that little motel, Sea Escape Motel, which went that way down, and then you get on around the casino and to where Shore was. You have basically Salmon Harbor Resort, Shipper Shore, agricultural across.
And the circle is talking about what?
I don't know what that circle is.
That is a youth, qualifies as a youth center.
So just to be realistic, you're not going to get a whole bunch of stores up here on the way to Oregon. Let's talk about that.
Doesn't make any sense.
Not really, just because it's not it's
I mean,
going to
there's-
be more and more a normal commodity, and it's not going to go back the other way. And
Truthfully, when you look at it
understand that.
from the business model of where you would place a store, the Last Chance Liquor Store is probably the one that would be the most viable for somebody to come into.
Right, but it's still a drive. It's like, it's kind of out of town, and you're going to Oregon anyway, so it's not like, you could maybe have one up there economically, but you're not going to get a cluster of them there just because
So-
they can.
So as, and
So I don't think we need to worry about this map.
looking at all the maps, we can probably dissect them for hours on end, but,
Sure, that's why we should go to the next map.
yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, ultimately, what we're going to determine is, sure, you could put 500 retail spaces in this county if, in fact, you could find owners of properties who were willing to rent and banks that were willing to take money and so on and so forth and all of the above, but that's not the case. So we could make these circles ginormous, and you still could potentially put 500 retail ordinance places in the county, but again,
Sure.
that's an unrealistic
Sure.
thing that is literally not going to happen. And so it all eventually boils back down to, are we going to put a fixed number on it and how that's going to be chosen? And if you're not, then you're not. And so, I mean, I don't know if anybody sitting up here is saying, let's have 4,000-foot buffer from a school, right?
Right.
So exactly what are we really discussing necessarily?
I don't know, we're discussing whether or not the market can limit the number to a reasonable time, or if we need to do it externally with other controls. I think that's,
You know, we could look at it from
that's
the
the
other
point of the
angle
discussion.
and, you know, just so the community's best served and, you know, so we get them spread around the county. You know, allow, you know, a certain amount in each map or, you know, one in each map or.
Well, we got two different conversations going on here at the same time. What are you guys talking about?
We're in Smith River now.
Okay, what are you talking about?
He's asking about a
Share it with the group.
Well, the red section, I didn't, you know, everybody's looking at the pink section.
Okay.
It's a commercial C, and it's on Fred Hay Drive, and 101. And, or Ocean View Drive, excuse me, and 101. And the Mexican food restaurant and Valley View Motel is the pinker one, Caddy Corner is the red one, and that's a private residence that could be split. Where that red is, because that guy owns, I think it's 10 acres there with that house, he rebuilt the house, and he has some cows there, and I believe it could be split if somebody wanted to do Ocean, or, excuse me, 101 frontage and Ocean View. But the whole town of Smith River is totally out,
I can't see more than one store surviving in that entire region economically.
economically, I think I agree with that.
What do you guys think, Blake, Bobby? This concept about there not being, there isn't economics to support more than one store in this region, north, so we don't really need to worry about it too much, other than just making sure that one store has sufficient setbacks.
Well,
I mean, you might.
your economics, if you're discussing on an economic level, that could be, in the future, could be totally wrong, because economically, it could become beneficial for people to buy cannabis in California versus Oregon, and then all of a sudden, Smith River and those properties closer to the Oregon border become the hot spot like the liquor store had in the past.
used to be,
Yeah, used to be. And so, yes, maybe as we speak here at this very moment, that's the case, but that doesn't discount down the line. That could become the spot.
So that's what Joel meant by, you know, if we start with a little bit more restrictive, it gives us the allowance to be less restrictive in the future with less harm to staff and less harm to business owners.
Yeah, because there's no way to prove it, but I don't think any place is going to be the spot. There is no spot anymore, because unless everybody goes the direction of back the other way toward prohibition, and we get less and less outlets. But there's just this major ramp to more and more and more everywhere.
The spot becomes the place that has the best product and the best customer service.
Sure, it's less and less about location and less about the minimum number of available permits, and more about supply, meeting the demands of your customers. So it's not going back the other way. We're not going back into prohibition where there's spots versus product, you know?
That's exactly why I'm not an advocate for limiting the number necessarily. I like that we're expanding on the buffer zones that the state has put in place
Right.
to try to mitigate those concerns more. And then what's going to happen is going to happen. You say the best grower, the best product, the best customer service is going to win out in the long run. And so I look at it from that perspective. If the other perspective is somebody wants to put a number on it, then that's a whole different conversation.
4
than
years
we're having.
ago, yeah, that was the situation.
Yeah.
4 years ago, it was like, where are the available places? Where's the spots? That's all that matters. It doesn't matter at all what's even in your store.
So these buffers are
It's not like that
are
anymore.
good. I like the 2,000, and there's a couple questions I have specifically, but I don't hear anybody, like I said, giant, bigger buffers, and I don't really hear a clamoring for wanting lesser buffers other than potential access on corridors. So
Right.
that maybe is more of a specific conversation as to
So
how
it's
that would
2,000
change.
feet for schools, seem, and, let's see, I didn't notice worship locations. I thought that we.
Yeah, I was just
were
gonna
doing
mention that. It's funny,
Why
I was
did
just
not see
noticing that.
before?
Because I did think that we were leaving that out. We weren't going to, unless it specifically had a daycare or a youth center or some
Right.
sort of child-based.
Right. Well, it's just so we could see it, I guess, to see if we decided if we want to keep it on there or not.
Okay.
Yeah, we asked for it.
Okay,
Okay.
Three of those
Okay.
four things have a definition.
So does the 2,000 feet seem reasonable? And then if there's problems with corridor, we can adjust it with corridors. Everybody happy with the 2,000 foot? I don't have a
Based off
problem
of
with
schools,
it.
right?
Schools.
We're talking about schools here at
Schools,
2,000?
the red circles.
I'm definitely okay with that, for sure.
Schools, okay.
With the potential to, work in something for the corridor access points.
Right, exactly. No, worship centers. We had gone back and forth on that separate from the youth centers, and that's just our own thing. It's not a state thing, it'd just be a county thing.
So I guess where we left off with that, I thought, was trying to come up with what the definition was.
Yeah, but
And-
we're accepting that it's not a state requirement, I think, and we're just, if we wanted to have our own setback for worship centers.
Yeah, and so
then that's what we're talking
definition
about.
of that, how do
I-
we
How do
define,
we define
that? And I know Joel was talking more of it in a different scenario, controlling that, I can't.
Right. Well, the definition for the county, if it comes to enforcement, if it comes to denying somebody a permit, what's the process of defining the church, I suppose? The ones that are around, we know, there was some question about.
I thought we had discussed this at the last meeting, and what we came to was that
It's
the
on the
use
county.
permit process, where the public would be engaged in that,
Right.
the notifications would be sent out to surrounding spaces. If there were a church within a space that had an application near them, they would then have that opportunity to present their arguments for or against, at the planning commission.
Yeah, that,
I thought that's where we left it with
That sounds
worship center
reasonable to me.
locations.
Rather than
allowed.
having a blanket space, because it may or may not be an issue for a particular
Yeah,
church.
I think that we were going to, do that as part of the use permit process, we would do specific outreach to
Right.
any church that's within X number of feet, whatever we
Yeah.
choose to put
Yeah.
into the ordinance.
And having these buffer zones on here, spaced out, gives us an idea of what a potential use permit presentation may come from.
As opposed to a legally fixed hard line. in an
Exactly, so we're not going to be
Right.
stating that in our recommendations like we would want 2,000 foot or 1,000 foot, just naturally allow that process to go through a use permit thing.
I would have to think that if a church showed up and said, I don't want it this close, the planning commission, the public would probably respect that,
Right, I think so too. I think we're small enough that we can make that happen.
So we're okay with 2,000 foot from schools, but we're not going to deal with setback locations from worship locations at this point?
Could we put a recommendation, something that would be added into the ordinance that, alerts us to the fact that specific outreach will be done if to
Right.
churches,
Right.
Yeah.
within so many feet?
I remember saying there was
Just so it's
something
part of
like
the code?
that.
Yeah, so if we're looking at like the notice requirements where we're gonna send property owners within 300 feet or whatever, we can say churches within 5,000 feet.
Right.
Will get notice.
That's what I was just,
Remind me again how you define that? How do you know how to send stuff to a church to notice them?
well, I think we would probably look at our maps and, I mean, unless, I think
Is
that
it
was
as
one of
the-
our dilemmas from the very beginning is where
That's
are they
my-
all
kind of my
located? I
point,
think
right?
we
Like,
would do.
how do you alert them, the church? If a church has a specific, they're getting this specific set treatment, right? That you get notice if you're
I
within this
think we would
bigger
do our
zone.
very best.
I think if
Yeah,
you really, I think if
okay.
it came down to where you really couldn't find the church and you didn't know it was a church,
Then you're kind of.
So my only concern with that for the county, not as as financially, is if you do your very best to notice the church, right, and it's written in your ordinance, and then you allow the permit and the business owner goes forward and the church comes in later and says, but you never noticed me. And you say, I did my very best, and the church
it's a
is
good
upset
point.
with that, you might be on the hook for all the financial ramifications thereafter.
Well, what,
We also do other public notification. We do posting on site and we do in the newspaper. So it's not mandatory.
right, well, we'd be creating this obligation for ourselves.
But I appreciate your point, and
Yeah.
yeah, maybe we would want to revisit that.
We'd make it, we'd protect ourselves.
so that as long as you give a reasonable notification, you can't come back
That's
and.
all I'm trying to think of, is how you
Yeah.
protect yourself. If you arbitrarily wrote something like that in there, you just need to figure out how to do that.
That's where Joel makes his money.
Yeah,
So my job is to
Joel's got the
protect,
big bucks.
my job here is to protect the church, the kids, the youth, the situation out there. And I'm going to advocate for recommending a bit large buffer around churches, right? To be defined later, of course, because we can't define that today. But I'm still in favor of that. I hear what we're saying here, but that's the direction I would err in.
Sure.
So here's an issue, is what happens when a church comes in the neighborhood after we have an existing use?
Same thing that happens with everything that comes in later.
Yeah, youth centers.
You're out of luck.
Daycares or.
Well, you know, if you're renewing these permits every year, and
Yeah.
a church moves next to you, your permit runs out, now you have to move?
Does that happen now, Joel?
Yeah, well, the
In
way-
any way, case, or form, does that happen now, anywhere?
Well, it will with cannabis, because these are at the
Really?
state level, they're yearly permits. We're not talking about a use permit for like a mobile home park where you get it until
Yeah.
something happens to you. Yeah. And so,
Yeah.
you know, I don't mind, you know, if a church moves next to you and you have to move. Doesn't bother me
Sure.
anyway. I just want to bring it up so people. Another thing we can do is, instead of defining worship centers, we create like a registry and let people decide they're a worship center, sign up, and then
Oh,
you have a list, and then, you know, it's, anybody can put their name on the list, so it would be like another notice type thing, something for the community to come by and say, you know, that's my neighbor, that's not a church, or something like that.
The only thing that I don't like about that, and it's not, I'm not sitting here saying, like, we should discount churches necessarily, but there's this whole separation of what is a church and legally, and you get to create a registry, but what prevents me from putting my name on that there registry, just because I don't want it around my property? Right? How do we fix that?
I'd just call you out on your BS when it comes to a public.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. The registry wouldn't be, the definition of a church is the things on the registry. It'd be an opportunity for people to throw their name out there and say, I want to be considered a church. And then when it comes to the hearing, you know, then you can argue about it. I don't know if it helps that much, but it's,
And that's how it would be dealt with if things that come in afterwards, daycares, or parks, whatever, that then displace existing businesses, then that'd be a battle for that time. You cross that bridge and you come to it. It'd be a
I hadn't
public
thought of that
debate,
either, Joel.
right?
That is a good question.
So
What happens after
at the
that?
state level, and I haven't looked at this, but from what I understand of the state permitting process, you have to be X number of feet away. And if one year you apply and you meet that requirement, and the next year you apply and you don't, you're out of luck. I don't think that you're entitled, you don't have a vested right to your state permit.
I do believe there is current lobbying work right now in efforts with the California Growers Association in Sacramento to start working out some of those kinks. If they're going to get it done in time, you know, for that to not come an issue in 2019, we don't know. But I do know that there's currently work to rectify that.
Maybe that sounds, and I don't know if this is something the county would want to take on, because it seems like maybe it's a larger than life proposition, but that sounds like a flaw at the state level of how this is working. And, you know, it basically opens it up to where if somebody really doesn't like cannabis, they can figure out how to shut you down within 12 months because they will
Right.
open a
Well,
facility
locality can allow
within
it,
the California parameter of your
A
property.
locality could
possibly.
just have it in their ordinance that it doesn't apply retroactively, or a county can also lessen the distance. It doesn't have to be 600 feet if the county allows it. Those are, it says unless, it doesn't say, the state says unless specified, unless a different distance is specified. It doesn't say a greater distance specified, it says a different distance specified. So you can get closer. That's how Crescent City is gonna do any of this, because they don't even have 600 feet anywhere from these things. So they have to go in and define distances that are less. I could be wrong.
There's
I'm
actually,
not a
that's,
lawyer,
that-
but-
I'll clarify that. They are actually sticking with the state minimum
Oh, are
guidelines.
they?
They're not going any less.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
I
Are they allowed
I haven't
to?
looked at it that closely, but in the state law, it says the state is the minimum standards and localities can make it more restrictive. I would guess, my interpretation, my hunch would be that you can't make it a smaller
Well, City of
setback.
Arcata's already did it, because they
You
have
you can't do
existing
it smaller,
operations that don't
or
meet.
unless your community's adopted a different distance. So like
Right.
Davis has made it to where, I think they have state standard, but they have the discretion. So if they decide, well, you know, we want it here anyways, they, you know, through the planning commission, they can allow it. But
Right.
it's 600 feet, you know, unless your municipality has decided on a different
That might be a
different
really
distance.
good thing for you to look into, Joel, is if, in your opinion, if you think that there is the ability to go less than, because I hear what you guys are saying, and I've read that when the layman, translation of it is presented, but then when you actually read the code, it says exactly what Eric's saying. It says you cannot go less restrictive. It can only be more restrictive is what it literally says in the legal
Yeah,
code.
I will look at that specific language, but, you know, just because Arcata's doing it doesn't mean that it's legal. And it doesn't mean that it's gonna hold up in court. If you have a different kind of community that cares, has different values and wants to challenge. So, you know, I wanna put us on the best possible footing, and I'll definitely look at that.
And on the next map, up Heidi, on Hiuchi, that one is gone out of there again. That Mick Thomas's old building that was a guide shack was gone to a church, so.
Okay, so that would be right here.
Yeah, right there. It's that one
Right
on
there.
there. Yep.
I would just be concerned for business owners in general, if that is in fact the case, if somebody can turn around and place one of these things that we're putting these buffers on inside of the buffer, that seems like something that is just, it's horrible to be doing to business owners in general. Like, right, you have absolutely no control over maintaining your business,
I
if
think
that's
that
the
would-
case.
I think that would become a subject to public debate, sort of, I think.
You know, the way the state law is written now, and since you have to have your state permit to get a local one, and vice versa, right? You know, I think the law is written that you are kind of out of luck if somebody moves next to you. Now, is that susceptible to challenge? You know, is the state law valid? It's an interesting issue. I look forward to the next 15 years of cannabis litigation to find out, but
if you're, and in your opinion, if in fact that's how state law is working, putting in our ordinance that it's, you know, your grandfather then, let's say, or it is as of today, and if something comes in later, it doesn't apply, well, that may be against the law, and probably, maybe not something that Del Norte County wants to approach necessarily by
yeah, there could be
possibly
a
breaking it.
situation where our state law is just in conflict. So we could allow something and say, yeah, you can have your permit, and then they apply to the state and say, we have our local authorization. The state says, I don't care, right? You're still too close to that school, even though it just opened up, you know, this year. You know, it would probably be easier for everybody if we were consistent with state law so that it's not too drastically different set of standards. Well, even if you were in compliance here, you know, and we let you grandfathered you in or whatever, yeah, you're still not going to be in compliance with state law if we can't shorten those buffers, right?
The state changed it, right?
Yeah.
I'm just thinking in a long-term frame of mind, like if we're gonna allow somebody to continue with their permit there, and the state puts an elementary school in the place right next to it for whatever ridiculous reason they chose to do that, and we sit here with a law saying, well, you can keep your cannabis shop there forever, and maybe that's also.
I don't think we
out
should
of the
touch
realm.
any of that. I think
I think
that's,
so, yeah.
that's a schoolyard fight, you know? If
Yeah.
people want to fight like that, you know?
That could be just up to the business
And
owner
that's
fight.
sort of like, I don't think the county's ready to get in on how to deal with that.
I think we need to address it. It is that you're testing that you are 600 feet or the distance that your community allows. And it's not a greater distance, it's a different distance. And so that's where we get the opportunity to protect somebody who's put a lot of money into a location, to say that they are, accept, we can create a smaller distance for the occasion where, the moving to the nuisance situation happens where a school comes in. I think Del Mart Collective on North Crest was shut down in that way. There was a school, a little private school that opened up at North Crest in Washington, and then he got a letter, I don't think from the county, I think from the feds, saying he was too close. It was probably at the bequest of people at the time that were in the county, I would imagine, that brought it to the federal government's attention. But then he had to leave, and so, I think we should make the ordinance fair. It does allow for a smaller distance, and if we're going to go for greater distances in certain circumstances, we should make it fair on the reciprocating end to a business owner who did all their research to make sure they got the right location, and then a more righteous person, I guess, comes in and they get to throw them under the bus,
We probably need some definite clarity then whether or not the state will allow a locality to specify a
I'll
lesser
look at it.
distance.
I'll look at it. But, at least from an attorney's perspective, when you're making a fairness argument, you're applying for a 1-year permit. That's what you're applying for. You're applying for 1 year. So I don't know if you're not being able to do the second year as a fairness argument. You got what you paid for.
but yet the state wants to see a 2-year lease, so, I mean.
Well, that sucks.
So, I don't think we need to, this is a point where, this is why we're here, is to make this, work better than what we're afraid of, right? So otherwise, we could just go to the state standard, if we don't want to try and make something custom that suits, our values, we could just do the state standard, and I'd be all for that. But
we're not clear still whether or not the state will allow, the smaller distance like you're saying, so somebody could still come
we
in.
could easily Google it and have an answer within 2 minutes.
No, that's not how that works.
I don't think it's come up yet. I don't think it's come up yet.
I'll look at that.
It hasn't come up yet, but
That's gonna be cross-referencing those state requirements to, another I know it's in another section that talks about the minimum requirements and the maximum requirements. I'll look at that. We'll have that next meeting, but for
Yeah, so
now,
that sounds like a greater than
Yeah.
we can figure out right now.
for now, let's
thing.
keep going through these
Yeah.
maps.
Yeah.
So again, when we're looking at the Gasky map, we're not necessarily considering a 2,000-foot buffer on a worship location, correct?
Yeah, that's where it's discussionary.
It's just, it's a
That's where
discussion base at this
use
point. The
permit
blue
stuff.
dot represents the Gasky flat
Right.
location.
So on
Because-
the worship
Yeah.
center thing, kind of going back to, like, Blake would like to see a hard minimum number, and from my perspective, I can see how that could be useful in a situation where without a number, every church is obligated to spend time and effort participating in the process to assert what it wants to see. Now, they may not want to have to do that, so let's say there was just some minimum number, like let's say 300 feet. And then that means that they wouldn't have to do anything. They don't have to lift a finger to at least ensure that 300 feet. So maybe that's sort of where.
I mean, and
where you're
300
coming
foot is more
from
than a city block. So like, you'd walk this stretch, there's 300 feet, and then you'd be on the next block.
So that could work, but then conversely, if the church didn't care and there's a 300-foot setback that doesn't need to be there, I don't know if that matters or not.
I would agree with you on that, Jesse, totally, but the whole problem boils back to how do you define it? And we've all sat here and said we can't define it.
Sure.
And therefore, any hard line you put on a worship center or church,
Right.
technically, by the letter of the
Right.
law, applies to every piece of property in the county. If you want, if the owner
That's
of that their
true.
property
That's
wanted it
true.
to.
That's
And
true. So let me-
I like the whole discretionary process that gives.
We
the-
could try to solve the church definition problem.
Yeah.
By creating a registry and giving an opportunity to challenge, and if nobody challenges that, that's a church.
It
It's a step, it's an
absolutely
extra
is
process.
definable. It's not as gray as we keep talking about it here, and you've said that, Kurt, at many meetings, and I disagree with you every time. To me, it is definable. Our job is to give some basic parameters, not 300 feet, I'm saying 3,000 feet around churches, a big number. And then it's up, the onus is on the church to come in and meet the requirements. And if a church pops up in a community, I would say the community has a right to do that, right? So there's, both sides of that argument could be argued.
If a church pops up, the community has the right to do
So can
what?
you provide what that definition is then? Because no one else seems to be able to, and I would be more than happy to
I would go
entertain the
back-
idea if we had a physical definition in front of us and how you legally defined it.
Sure. So I think that the church, this is just what I said kind of in the beginning, it's defined by the neighbors, it's defined by that small region or community. Either they're going to agree or they aren't. And the registry, when say an application comes in and says, we are a church and we're located here, then the county has a right to review that at that point.
Right.
And they're either going to look further into it by asking the neighbors.
Okay.
Or they aren't, right?
I got what you're
It-
saying. Is that something that
so-
the county could do?
So then what we need to
Joel?
do then is we need to create a legal definition by something like that defines what that is then. And so we need to come up with a legal definition of a worship center or church or whatever you would like to call
It can be
it.
done, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, so so then we need to come up with that
So
definition.
they gotta go hand in hand. I get what you're saying. If you're gonna have a number that's legally
Yeah.
bound, then you gotta have a definition that goes with it. That makes sense.
A process.
So, in the revenue and taxation code, our ability to tax organizations is limited. We can't tax, the tax can't apply to any minister, clergyman, Christian Science practitioner, rabbi, or priest of any religious organization that has been granted an exemption from federal income tax as an organization described in section 501c3. That's like the bare, raw, cold, technical. If we wanted to use that, we could, and then it'd kind of be on the church to show up and say, here's my tax status. Yeah, we could do that. We could do that.
We could come up with but you have to provide that federal.
If you
exemption.
combine that with a little bit of increased notice, and say everybody within every church that we know of, we send it to, it's published in the paper, you have an opportunity, it happens at the planning commission. It's not going to be, the permittee is not going to be able to go and verify the tax status of its neighbors. It would have to be, if you go through the process and no church, even if there's a church, it's obviously there, if they don't show up and speak for themselves, the permit applicant isn't going to be able to provide that tax status proof.
But then in a year, we're dealing with the potential for them to change their mind.
Yeah, a year, they go,
So-
oh, we missed that the last time.
Yeah.
That's part of this.
What's the parameters by which you, yeah.
See you guys, I gotta go.
Yeah.
Brings me back to the point if I want to boot out of my house because I'm going to file that.
Right, people can go, people can go to all kinds of extraordinary lengths to do battle with people and businesses that they disagree with, so, but we can't protect against every and all possible evil doings.
I mean, I guess we just have to sit here and hope that our consensus as a group of concerned community individuals can help to mediate some of the concerns from, the section of people who don't want to see cannabis here in any way, shape, or form, to the people who would prefer to see it inside of this room, because there's that middle ground. And what we hope with this process and with, the lack of public input that we see here on a regular basis, what we're hoping is that the people are getting educated and they're realizing that, what this side wants completely doesn't always jive with what this side wants, and we need to come together. And that's what, I think that's what the onus for Blake is, for his section of community. It's the onus for, people like us who are on the cultivator side of it, the flower product side of it, to teach and educate the people that are the hardliners on either side of our spaces, that that's not really the way that communities work in conjunction. And, you know, I think that's, again, the onus would be on you, the onus would be on us. It would be our responsibility as community members and members of this advisory committee to show the necessity for community input and agreement, consensus. You know, we can't all have all of the eggs. We have to share the eggs in the basket.
All right, well said, thank you. So the version of the maps that has the 1,000-foot buffers doesn't seem to be a problem. I don't see needing to go down to 600. I don't see any real issues. They kind of seem to be inside the larger circles, a lot of them. I'm not seeing big sections of commercial space.
Can we look at
Locked out.
Klamath before we call it a day?
I don't know where exactly I guess the actual reservation line is along the river, and then they have yet to, the Yurok tribe has yet to respond about what other lines or where they would like to see a boundary from.
We do have someone from the tribe, an employee of the tribe who's here in the audience.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Super. Thank you.
Hi. My name's Kate Fisher. I'm the Assistant Director of Planning and Community Development for the Yurok Tribe. And we would like to work with you in consultation to determine where cannabis is appropriate near the reservation, on the reservation, and with the ancestral lands. There is a process for doing that. CEQA mandates it. You seem to believe that CEQA is not in effect here. That is debatable. But the state law requires it. AB 52 and SB 16 require consultation with the tribe. So we're willing to work with you. We're working with Humboldt County currently, developing an MOU with them for permitting cannabis where it doesn't interfere with traditional cultural practices. So the tribe's position is that they're open to consultation and collaboration.
Wonderful. Is that different than we heard maybe a meeting or two ago, that they were just opposed to this completely?
There's a zero tolerance on the reservation.
Okay,
So that's distinct from off the reservation.
got it. Thank you.
Since you're here, this map up here is Klamath, and these county-owned, private property owned within fee to the county. Does any of this property fall within the reservation, I guess you want to call it, boundaries or control of the Yurok tribe?
I think what would be most useful is if I shared with your planners a shape file that they could apply to the map that has the reservation boundaries and the ancestral territory boundaries. Our GIS staff can provide that.
Yeah, the ancestral territory obviously encompasses over all of these lots.
Correct.
And so I know there were some federal laws that changed with the Yurok tribe where it gave the Yurok tribe control over federally owned properties in a
Correct.
certain area. And so I guess I was just wondering, these are like, for example, the Glen up there has some commercial properties, which
Right.
legally, under the bounds of everything that we're discussing, the state's discussing, could be potential places for a shop, let's say. And so, but then that's in conflict with what you're saying then from the tribe?
Yes, it's within the reservation boundaries, and there's a zero tolerance. There are also playgrounds and things like that in the Glen that aren't on your maps. So I think the best approach, rather than me
Yeah,
trying to tell you, is to give you the
Yeah,
information.
the playgrounds defined by the state are
Yeah.
not
We
private
definitely need
playgrounds,
that
they have to be,
information.
yeah.
How are the best way, I'm not sure how the best, I've communicated a little bit with Ellie Hoops about how to
Right,
get
right.
the coordination going on between this department and yours.
Right.
And whatever we need to find out to do to make that happen would be great, because we're definitely at the point where we gotta pick numbers, draw boundary lines, find out where this is,
Right.
get input, what the
Right.
distance from that boundary line is, and all
Right.
of that, so we can get it on this
Right.
ordinance.
Well, I think staff consultation to begin with, and then government-to-government
Right. How do
consultation
we-
is the
How do
correct
we
format to
initiate
go.
that? 'Cause we've been asking for a while, I don't know where to start it with. I've asked Chris Howard to get some kind of conjunction between the tribe and this working group together, and I don't know where it is.
Yeah, I'm
Nice.
not sure where that's stalled either. I know, Ellie asked Chris.
Yeah,
I'm
I've asked
not sure
several
what
times
happened after
too.
that.
Okay.
You can direct your communications to me, and I can make sure they get to the work group and to
Okay,
council.
Kate Fisher.
Yeah, Heidi has my contact.
Okay, super, cool, thank you. Yeah, so like those details are like over my head. I don't know how to communicate those things or like what to do with that really. I don't even know how that works. I've been asking everybody about it. I'm just not schooled enough about how that communication works, so. I don't know that I can even, other than just keep asking people to do it. I don't even know what I'm asking people to do. Okay. Do it.
Well, not right here, but.
All right, well, besides the secret political things.
Staff can check with administration and board of supervisors to find out the process to make that connection.
Okay, great, thank you.
So then that just kind of puts a lot of the Klamath mapping stuff kind of a little bit on hold until we get the reservational boundaries and the ancestral ground boundaries.
Yeah, that sounds
Okay.
fine, but we definitely need to get that information soon, so, because that'll be a holdup then unless we just decide to not include that area until we learn
And
about
technically,
it.
what you're saying there is, as far as this Klamath map goes, what she's saying is that all of these properties on this map are essentially.
Or within reservational boundaries or areas that they don't want to see it. That's kind of the
Yes.
gist that I'm
Yes.
I'm getting. Sure, yeah, please do.
The zero tolerance ordinance is within the reservation boundaries. The ancestral lands is a different case
Right.
and is where we're willing to work with the task force to
Right.
define areas. Any kind of decision has to come from council. I
Right.
can't speak for the tribe, I
Sure.
can't speak for council.
Right, and I just have a question about the boundary line, like, so the Glen, the whole, the cabins and the Renner gas station and Trees of Mystery, where is the reservation line in that area?
I can't, it's about a mile on either side of the river,
So
okay?
it's right in there somewhere?
Yeah.
Okay.
But the Glen is within the reservation.
Oh, it is,
boundaries,
okay,
yes.
the woodland cabins and stuff,
Yeah.
okay. That's about the end of the
Well, are you
commercial
asking about
space.
Woodland Villa?
Yeah, that's
Okay, that's
farther
not the
up.
Glen, that's a different,
Okay.
that's a different area.
Okay.
Okay.
Klamath
So
Glen.
that's why I
That's
think-
farther up past, farther north.
Right, I think
Okay. right.
that's why I think it would be best if you just included the reservation boundaries in your map and then the ancestral land boundaries. Because that would then
Exactly, yeah.
not lead to any misunderstandings.
Right, and then we can
right?
get that data from you. and
Correct.
Get it. okay,
Correct.
Without
I
you.
have to clear it with council and
Okay.
with our attorneys, but yes.
Okay.
It would be really good if we were able to get some clarification as to how the reservation boundaries interact with privately owned fee property within the county, that encompasses within those reservation boundaries. That would be the one thing we would want to try to figure out.
Yes, lots of good stuff to talk about. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Okay. Do you want to talk about, we didn't really focus on these more dense areas. The Crescent City map has, yes, we totally blowing that. Totally blowing that. Do you want to pause on this? And get a little public comment? Well, I don't know what else there is to do. I'm looking at it, and I'm pretty ready to be done with it.
I personally see very little reason to keep looking at the map, as opposed to just finalizing in maybe a future meeting what those actual hardline numbers are.
We're gonna talk specifics about
Can we talk
corridors.
about where the corridor might be
Right,
on this
those need to
map?
be defined pretty clearly here, so 101, so I'm looking right now at the map everyone's looking at. Crescent City North is called. Crescent City area. So that area of the 101, North Crest, right? Is that where we guys are talking about having an adjustment corridor?
Yeah.
That's separate from the boundaries because of the density of available commercial space.
I would think that the appropriate places for potential corridors would be Highway 101, maybe even Highway 199, and North Crest Drive. Those would be some of the major.
I think truly those are the only three that I
all I
would
can think
see
of.
that are, you know, major tourist
So do you just have
drive-through
a reduced
areas.
setback for that, or is it, how does that work? How do you define that?
Yeah, I mean, we would just have a reduced setback.
The properties that connect to those.
Yeah, we gotta figure out where they start and stop, though. I don't think it could be all of North Crest. Or
Right.
all of
No,
101, right?
So maybe like, you know, Upper North Crest to where it, doesn't it turn into?
Turns into Lake Earl
Yeah, it turns into
eventually.
Lake Earl Drive, right?
Yeah,
I
but
mean,
by that
basically,
time,
it's-
by that time, it's
I
pretty
feel like when I
residential.
drive down that way and I drive by Patty's place, it's like right after that, it seems like it gets into a more rural, less dense area as it goes through Lake Earl.
Heidi, is it at Harold Street that it becomes county? Where does North Crest become county?
Washington.
Well, it depends on what side.
Yeah.
What you have is somewhere around Wilson North on the east side is where you have county, Porta-Pints. Porta-Pints would be the first business on North Crest on that side. On the west side of North Crest between, I think you get all the way up to Washington, that was part of the Roosevelt annexation back in '04. Part of that used to be in the county, like where Charter Communications and Coast Auto used to be county, and now that's city. It's shown on this map as still being county, but that's incorrect.
So a North Crest corridor is gonna be one side of North Crest, you know, but by the time we get to the wellness center there, isn't that pretty much the end of the available space? We're talking about 3 or 4 blocks.
It stretches beyond the wellness center up to probably where the medical facility is, Crescent City Internal Medicine. Not a lot, but on the east side, and then on the west side, there's a bit.
Yeah, so I mean, you get to the wellness center and you have child welfare right there. I don't think anybody's gonna want to see reduced setbacks right there. And then past that, you know, it doesn't make sense. It goes into residential pretty fast and you've got UHS there and stuff. You know, if it's from, you know, the Porta-Pints area on that one side of the street, you know, does that little space,
I would
I
think that.
can't tell where it is on here, but does it need a reduced setback? You know, is that space, it looks like there might be available right there.
I think it's, I'm trying to look. It's mostly open at the moment in that space. However, that doesn't discount, like we were saying, future enterprises and how that could affect these spaces in the future.
I guess if we went back to the churches, though, isn't there a very large church over here on Douglas that's not shown on our map? And our Daily Bread Ministries, thank you. So we have 2.
So those would just be discretionaries, you know.
Yeah. I mean, I think we started the discussion on the North Crest site due to the fact that we have an existing enterprise there that's been operating under the medical guidelines for, you know, over 10 years. I don't know if there's going to be anybody truly who wants to set up shop there after this point, but I think, didn't we discuss earlier about potentially just having no setbacks for medical-only establishments? Because that might suffice the current operator in that space, and maybe we're not dealing with a North Crest site at that point, and we're just saying, okay, there's one space grandfathered as medical.
That brings us back to whether we can reduce the state setbacks, and
Okay.
we can get into that
Okay.
at the next meeting. But as far as the 101, then, Heidi, when does 101 become county?
101 county,
Like right
the
before
wrong
Big Five.
mouse. Thank you, okay. So let's see here. Okay, you know where up here, where you see there's actually, I believe that there's a mobile home park and the Renner station. we would be just north of that, which would be where the county would start. I think I'm in the wrong spot here, maybe. Yeah, oh, I'm sorry, this is, yeah, thank you, Erin. Okay, this would be the end of the city, so this would be the county, trying to think what, the corner of, yes, just around that area, that the flea market, there's a, what am I trying to think, a used cars lot at the corner near Parkway and 101, and then on the opposite side, I believe it's from either Burchell Street or Wilson Avenue, is all county, you know, where you'd have I think there's a Texaco station and trying to think what the old Indus Distributing, some other, sorry.
So just from an arbitrary
Something like 20 years
perspective,
ago.
if we're considering these corridor accesses on Highway 101, I don't really personally see any difference between any part of Highway 101 that goes through this entire city. Let's say from Washington Overpass, or just this side of Washington Overpass, when you actually start to enter and come off the highway, the freeway, all the way through to the south end of town. I don't see any major difference between why one shop should be in one place versus the other. And I think that whole area, if we were going to entertain lesser setbacks, would just encompass the whole thing, and you would just pick whatever is the actual line that the county has prerogative over versus the city would just be whatever that line is, and then the city is going to do whatever they're going to do in difference of us. And so my thought is the whole corridor, if we're going to allow access on 101 as a corridor, it just applies to the whole area from south to north of this area, Crescent City greater area.
And regardless of what we learn about states and reduced setbacks, it could just, if we just made it the state standard setbacks, or like you're saying, if medical only dispensaries just needed to meet the state setbacks of 600 feet, and then our larger setbacks are for the retail.
Yeah, I'm not
That's another way.
I'm not thinking at all of trying to go lesser than the state's saying.
Sure.
I'm just thinking of a lesser number than we've put this greater number on it.
Yeah.
So can you all remind me what we're trying to accomplish with the corridor concept? Is it to cluster businesses? Or-
So that we can have big setbacks around schools and playgrounds without Xing out potentially
Everything.
a few of the good places where you and everybody would agree they should be. That's all, is that.
Okay. For like tourism potentials and whatnot, that's where we're thinking.
Because there's like,
Benefit the county the most, and if we don't have them on, let's say, obvious thoroughfares like 101, then how is the tourist find them, and how do they spend their money in the county?
hey Patty, do you want to say anything before you have to go? I'm so sorry, you guys, that we've messed up the schedule on public comment. So if any time anybody wants to say anything and we're not paying attention, yeah, just do it. Oh, that's okay. Sorry to hold you up so long.
So, I appreciate everybody and everything that you're doing for us. Nice bow tie, I like that. And I would just like to say, you know, I hope that we can figure out something on this footage with the church and everything. So, you know, we're just getting oodles of medical patients coming in, and it's convenient for them. Most of them, like I said, are over 65. So it's hard for them to even get around, you know. So I'm just hoping that something does work out with that so we can keep our location. My landlord is willing to give me a lifetime lease on it. She's a strong supporter of it. Her son died of cancer, and it was cannabis that was the only thing that helped him through his suffering. That's the only reason why she allowed me there. It's real. It did take us 2.5 years to find a location that it would actually allow a cannabis dispensary. So it is tough. There might be some vacancies, but not everybody's going to work with it. So I do appreciate your work, and I'm sorry, but I do have to go this time.
Thanks for waiting for us. Yeah, so that's another huge limiting factor is the lack of bankability. A lot of places won't, have a big old giant deposit requirement or whatever. They're not going to take your pile of cash and they're, whatever. So I think that is another natural restrictor. Anybody else want to do any public comment before we wrap it up?
I can clarify something.
Yes, please.
So as far as primary residences is concerned, that's basically where you file your taxes. You can't really do voter registration because not everybody registers to vote, so that's not gonna work.
Not everybody files taxes either.
That's true. The other thing that you can do is that they just need to show that they're actually living there for, I think it's 2/3 of the year, so 9 months out of the year. That's what actually qualifies it as a primary residence for your tax purposes. Septic tanks, man, that's a good one. We see houses built on top of septic tanks.
My house is on top of my septic.
Yeah, we see decks on top of septic tanks. We see all kinds of stuff on top of septic tanks. The major issue with that is not so much, the health and safety of it. If you build something on top of a septic tank and it needs to be fixed, obviously you're going to lose that structure. It's up to you. Whenever we do sell a property, we make sure that those things, we work with planning all the time. It's like, hey, where's this septic tank even located, first of all? Secondly, where is the reserve zone? People don't even know the maps. I mean, no offense to council or staff or anything, but your maps suck. You need to catch up. What was the other thing I want to talk about? That's pretty much it.
Give it the next minute, then shout it out.
What's that?
If you think of that last thing in the next minute, then shout it out.
I will.
Yes, thank you.
Speaking, so let's hit up some of the highlights. I kind of noticed in this meeting that you guys kind of went over a lot of the same stuff that went over the last meeting. It seems like a lot of hours were spent debating about the churches and what to do and what not to do. I would hope that there would be some kind of consensus brought forward, instead of kind of going over the same thing repeatedly. That's just me saying that from the audience. I'm glad that you guys decided not to go with any ventilation for like the personal grows. I think it's very restrictive. I think it's ridiculous, so thank you for not doing that. And again, back to the church issue, I see that kind of being a problem if a church, let's say I wanted to start a church of the sacred tax exemption and cannabis restriction, and plop it right there in the middle of where it would restrict a current business, and then the next year when they come back, they're unable to renew their license because of a church being there, just by pure spite from somebody that doesn't want cannabis in the community. And lastly, I guess, let's see what the board approves. Let's hopefully some of this will be brought back to the board to see what they're going to actually agree with, because ultimately they're the ones that are going to be making the decisions and voting on it. So hopefully some of this can be brought back to the Board of Supervisors to get a consensus as to how to move forward from here. So I'm kind of on the page of not wanting a huge setback for churches just for those reasons. And again, I've heard the argument made for cannabis and kids and everything, but obviously we're talking about a product that's never killed anyone ever, and a 5-year-old can walk into any one of the stores here in town and buy a bottle of aspirin and a case of Red Bull, with no restrictions at all, and voila, you've got a stomach ulcer or death. So I think putting restrictions on a product that's never killed anyone can be problematic in my opinion. So I guess that's just my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thank you.
Indoor filtration.
Got it.
Does anybody know why the ERC had recommended that? Was it
To reduce stink.
to reduce smell?
Yeah.
So they're not concerned with somebody growing 100 square feet outside, but they're more concerned about the smell inside someone's own home?
Well, when you're blowing air outside without a filter, I think that's the
Oh, well,
concern.
yeah.
I guess it's,
understand that.
yeah, I mean, that's debatable. I think that an outdoor garden can stink more than a
Usually
indoor
does,
garden.
yeah.
It could, it depends. But outside, there's more opportunity, I think, for natural ventilation, whereas inside, if you're collecting and concentrating odors and then power ventilating them outside, that concentration can be directed. And I think there's been some specific issues of directed
At the
ventilation.
Board of Supervisors meeting, they were talking
Yeah,
about
and
somebody
I think
complaining
that
about.
falls under other types of nuisance creation
Right.
and/or code violations.
Right.
Yeah.
Through specific.
Yeah, but
and,
filters
you know,
work.
Like Eric.
I mean, they
Oh,
really
I get
work.
it. Yeah.
So
And
that's
it's like
why-
Eric was saying, you know, I think you're going to find that there's going to be some places that are totally in compliance and they're going to stink. Kind of depends on the strain.
Yeah,
Joel
well,
hopes not.
I hope not.
Yeah.
I hope that if that happens, the neighbor doesn't mind.
Right.
Or the
Right.
grower doesn't have the exhaust pipe pointed right at their mouth.
At the moment,
Yeah.
no one minds because
This
it's
could be
been happening.
a great exercise in getting along with one another's neighbors.
Right. The only reason I brought that up is because somebody actually had brought that up at the supervisors meeting, that there was somebody complaining that there was every night, these guys kick on a fan and blow it, and 200 feet away, they can smell it. So.
The only thing I
I'm
would
not
add
opposed to
to
it.
that potential scenario, if we actually wanted to put something in the personal cultivation ordinance, is as opposed to saying you must have a filtration system, you could put something in there like, if you are going to ventilate from your structure with mechanical fans, it must be under a certain CFS. CFM, yeah. That would eliminate the high-powered fan blowing air far distances at greater volumes. And so just for a thought on that particular
Yeah,
scenario.
let's add that next year if we need to.
You know, I will say that,
See
you
if
know,
it
a lot of
pops
the
up.
exhaust fans that I've seen in a lot of the grow rooms and operations that I've been in, you know, a lot of their exhaust fans go out of sidewall of the home. Sidewall allows for that heated air, you know, to expand really dramatically on the outside exterior perimeters of the wall. Some of the places that I've seen that don't smell, they actually exhaust through the roof, just like we would naturally. Some of our sewer gas exhaust pipes, you know, all those things go through the roof. And what happens there is you're actually ejecting it into the atmosphere, and so it's actually going up. And as you know, science and physics, hot air expands and it rises. And so, you know, I mean, maybe we think about that at some point. I mean, if we get into an odor control issue with indoor grow operations on a personal level, I mean, you know, don't exhaust it out of your sidewall, exhaust it through a roof vent.
That's
It's
true,
the
yeah.
number one thing you can do to lessen the impact of smell and odor emitting from your grow room.
Yeah, everybody's septic tank vents out the roof.
Yeah.
Right. Well, there's a reason for it, and it has to be under a certain side, and, you know, you have to have.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a
overhangs.
calculation
The
based
building
off of
code
the
pretty
height
much
for it,
covers that.
exactly.
Like, you're technically not supposed to cut a hole in your sidewall and put a vent on it. That's
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
against building code if it
Right.
wasn't part of the original building plan.
This is for a dryer.
Well, those are different.
Sorry, I'm getting bogged down here.
But I do think that, you know, I mean, that those are little things that, you know, as we all get more educated about what happens when you grow cannabis, and, you know, I mean, those are just specifics to the industry that I know are you know,
Well, I mean,
legitimate. It's
let's face it,
sidewall,
people,
you know,
people who have been
exhaust
growing
is-
cannabis illegally for years, they know all the tricks of the trade at keeping it stealth. You're probably never going to know that there's an indoor grow anywhere near you.
You
I mean,
probably
they're
won't.
just going to continue to do what they.
You'll
always
smell
do.
the outdoor more than you'll smell the indoor.
Yeah, I would think so. Okay.
Cool. All right, we all done? Meeting adjourned. Oh, we should talk about schedule, and then last time we messed up because we didn't check in with Kylie before we did the schedule. So, is she like,
I'm gonna abandon just to go to the bathroom, but I'm good.
yeah, yeah. Okay, great. Is there an easy way to check in with her in the schedule for the boardroom for the next meetings?
You know, if we want to do next Wednesday or the Wednesday after, let's ask her, she'll send out the calendar invite,
Okay,
you know, and schedule it that way,
right.
right?
Isn't that what we've been doing?
Yeah, that's what we've been doing.
We just didn't talk to Kylie soon enough was all.
I don't think it's that usual that we have a training scheduled in here for 2 days.
Right,
That
right.
was annoying.
So do you guys want to do next week since we were 3 weeks?
I got a science camp. I mean, you guys are more than
Right.
welcome to carry on, but yeah, I'm in
next week too?
Wolf
Okay.
Creek, Prairie Creek for a science camp for kids.
Well, do we want to do it 2 weeks then?
Okay.
All right. Joel doesn't care.
I'm here every Wednesday.
You're here. Do we want to do a meeting with less people? Are we like, we're not in a time crunch at the moment right now. I'd like to get the retail thing done as.
Yeah, I'd like to get
ASAP.
retail. It sounds like we're not that far away.
I don't have that much else to talk about really with it. Finding out some details maybe about the state thing and see if that enters into anything that we're doing or not.
And then getting back together with the UROC, and getting some of that stuff taken care of before we can really move forward with the retail, because we've got to make that connection with them.
Was it helpful to do a meeting with
Without me, it's
two
fine.
and Blake gone? Is that all right, or should we just wait? I don't know what else,
Yeah,
depends
doesn't
on what
matter
we're
to me either.
doing, I guess.
I mean, I pretty much read all the stuff when it comes in anyway, so.
Right. I'm for having a meeting next week just to like see if we can get anything done sooner, but if people don't think it's helpful, then we don't need to.
Well, I'm sorry, what was your name what was your name again? Kate, do you think it would be possible to have that map, say, by next week at some point, in your estimation? Oh, really?
Okay,
Yeah.
then let's meet next week and then hope to be able to talk about some of the tribe issue setbacks and just whatever. If there's details that we feel like need to be dealt with the full, we can save them, but and then we can just have a short meeting. If we don't have enough to talk about, we can just do it for an hour or something.
Yeah, I think it would be, I mean, as soon as possible to get together with the UROC, and get
Everyone's
that,
laughing at me, how
that
come?
conversation going is gonna be the best thing. I think it's like the biggest step that we need to take before we can finalize the retail end
All
of it.
right, let's shoot for a meeting next Wednesday then.
So the meeting is going to be on the 25th, and we don't have a meeting scheduled for the 2nd.
We could just schedule both.
So you're essentially saying 3 Wednesdays in a row?
We could go back to the 2-week
I
schedule.
mean, that's not a criticism, I just want to make sure I write it on my calendar, my paper calendar.
I don't know, I was just doing 1 week. I don't mind if we want to go back to the 2-week schedule. I was just trying to get in another one here since we went 3 weeks.
I think, I'm not working on anything right now. Like, I don't need to put you guys off for 2 weeks so you don't slam me with work. We can come back every Wednesday until you're done with the retail, and then
I have a
Space
list of things that I need help with, Joel. If you have a lot of free time.
yeah. Send them over.
I need
I hear Joel saying he's ready to go.
I need to hire a full-time lawyer to just work for me all the time.
Let's meet next Wednesday.
Okay.
Keep the second
Got
on
it.
schedule too, and then if we decide next Wednesday.
Okay.
we want to delay, we could.
Okay, let's do that.
Let's keep them both there for now.
All right.
So Blake and I won't be here for the next meeting, but that's fine. And then you guys just, decide if you want to do it 2 weeks or a week after that.
Okay,
It's fine
sounds
with me.
good. Let's do that. Tentatively next week for sure. We'll schedule 2, and then if there's obvious conflict for the 2nd, then we can change it. All right, super.
Done.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you, everyone.